editing of every novel, you realize that certain scenes just aren't working. There are a variety of reasons this happens, and while removing those scenes is always one of the most difficult parts of the creation process, it functions like the proverbial pruning of a tree, providing room for other scenes to grow. In the end, the book is better off. That said, I'm always looking for places to show off scenes like these. They not only expose something I find very interesting about the process, but they often have gems in them that I am eager to share. The scene with Gaul and the bridge in this excerpt is a good example. The following sequence was pruned from A Memory of Light, the final book of The Wheel of Time. Fair warning up front, it includes a lot of characters in the middle of their arcs, so without a background in The Wheel of Time, you might be a little lost. I've done what I can to make it work on its own, but it can't, by nature of its origins, ever truly be a standalone. It also is not canon to The Wheel of Time. Though I'm very fond of how the sequence plays out, our eventual decision to delete it necessitated revisions to A Memory of Light, which grew to include some elements of this piece. The final book has no room for these scenes in its chronology. Characters would literally have to be in two places at once. In addition, a few arcs of side characters play out differently here, contradicting the published narrative. This shouldn't be seen as a replacement for those scenes. More, this is a chance for me to present something that never quite made it to publication. Imagine it as a glimpse of where the story could have gone, but ultimately did not. The setup is simple. The enemy has been using an alternate dimension known as the Ways to move troops in secret and attack cities unexpectedly. Camelin, the capital of the nation of Andor, and one of the most important cities in the series, has recently been invaded using the Ways. Our characters have decided that it's vital to interrupt the enemy's ability to use the Ways. They can't allow continued resupply and reinforcement of armies behind their front lines, and so a desperate plan is hatched. Perrin, with a team of elite troops and channelers, users of arcane power in the Wheel of Time, will travel through the Ways and destroy some of the paths the enemy is using. Hopefully, you will enjoy this for the fun bit of behind-the-scenes material that it is. In the postscript, I'll further explain why we deleted it. For now, please enjoy. A Fire Within the Ways. Robert Jordan and Brandon Sanderson. Chapter 1. The Gate. Perrin stepped through the gateway into Cairhien, gripping his hammer, and looked right and then left down the narrow cobbled alley. It was night, and the alley was dark, though lantern light shining through the gateway painted the cobbles golden at his feet. The city was rank with the smells of men, smoke from nearby chimneys, the lingering aroma of powders and perfumes, even the scent of paint on the wooden boards of the alley, long dried and gone stale. Missing was the scent of rotting food so commonly associated with cities. Not even the smallest scraps were left to rot in Cairhien these days. Part of him fixated on the smoke first, then tucked its presence into the back of his mind. Fire was the simplest and often the first way for a wolf to know that men were near. Perrin prowled down the empty alley, waving for his group to follow. The still air was strange. For wolves, noise was the other sign of humankind. People were often oblivious to how much noise they made. A man in the woods was usually a thunderous, crunching, snorting, grumbling affair. That cacophony should have been magnified many times here in the city. And yet it was still. Unnaturally still. Cairhien should not have been a quiet place even at night. Perrin reached the mouth of the alley and scouted the larger thoroughfare that it intersected, his eyes piercing the darkness. To his left, across the street, a building flew the line of Andor beside the rising sun of Cairhien. A few people passed by out here, smelling of wine and unwashed bodies. "Where is everyone?" Arganda asked, slipping up beside him, holding a shielded lantern. First captain of Alejandro's guard in Gildan, Arganda was a compact man, like a lean and powerful jackrabbit. He was a good one to have along on a hunt. Elaine has pressed most of them into one military division or another, Perrin said softly. Farm boys with kitchen knives and hay rakes, Galen said, coming up on Perrin's other side in his well-polished breastplate and helmet with 3 plumes, his single eye peering down the street. He could be a useful man, too, if he could be kept in check. They'll be cut to pieces by the first Trolloc they see. I think you'll find, Galen, Arganda said, that some farm boys can be dangerous, particularly if cornered. Quiet, you two, Perrin growled. I mean no offense, Arganda, Galen whispered. This is not a matter of class, but of training. A well-trained soldier is of equal value to me in battle, farm boy or lord. But pressed armies have no training at all. Queen Elaine should not rely upon them. I don't think she's going to, Perrin said. But what would you have them do, Galen? Sit and hide in their houses? This is the last battle. The Shadow will hurl everything it has at us. Better that the people should be armed and ready if the soldiers fail. The man quieted as, behind, the rest of Perrin's force moved through the gateway. Perrin wished he could still the clanking of armor and the fall of boots. If the Dark One discovered what they were up to, they'd find a force of Trollocs waiting for them in the ways. And yet, to go without at least some troops would have been foolhardy. It was a careful balance. Enough men to take care of trouble, if encountered, but not so many as to draw their own trouble. He'd settled on 50. Was that the right number? He'd stayed up nights, carefully going over this plan 100 times, and was confident in it. But this mission still had him constantly second-guessing his decisions. The ways were no careless jaunt through the forest. He suspected he knew that better than anyone. Last through the gateway, crowding the alleyway, were 6 pack mules laden with supplies. In addition, each soldier carried a kit with extra water and food. Galen had questioned the need for so many supplies, but Perrin had been firm. Yes, the pathway they'd planned looked like it would take only a few days, but he was taking no chances. While he couldn't plan for everything, he'd not have the mission fail because of something as simple as supply problems. That said, other than the pack animals, he'd brought no horses. Bridges in the ways would be narrow, particularly when broken or worn. It was better to rely on feet. That suited the Aiel just fine. Perrin had brought 10 of them, including Sulin and Gaul. 10 Gildanin, including Arganda, 10 Mayenners, including Galen, 10 White Cloaks, including Galad, and 10 Two Rivers men, including Tam, put him at exactly 50 soldiers. On top of that, he'd added Grady, Neald, Seren, Edara, Seonid, and her 2 warders. 5 channelers. Light Sandy wouldn't need to rely on them much. "Do you sense anything, Golden Eyes?" Seonid asked. Fair-skinned and dark-haired, the Carianan woman reminded him of Moiraine, but she was more severe. Though he'd thought of Moiraine as severe, too, when he'd traveled with her. Odd that he'd look back now and imagine her smelling of fondness when she spoke to him. Perhaps he was just remembering the past as he wanted to, like old Send Bui, claiming the pies at Beltane had tasted better when he was young. Either way, of the Aes Sedai who had traveled with him in the south, Perrin trusted Seonid most. At least she hadn't gone to meet with Massima behind his back. Perrin peered at the street, smelling scents on the air and listening for anything out of place. Finally, he shook his head in answer to Seonid's question. He placed 2 men as scouts at the mouth of the street and alleyway, then joined Seonid to walk back through the alley, her 2 warders following. Their goal wasn't the street, but the dead end of the alley where it intersected a large wall surrounding what had once been the palace of Lord Barthanes Damodred, a dark friend, and coincidentally, a cousin to Moiraine. His palace was now Rand's school. Perrin had never been there, but he found the back gate into the grounds just where it had been described. He knocked softly, and a stocky, gray-haired woman pulled the gate open. "Idrian Tarson?" Perrin asked. The woman nodded, smelling of worry as she ushered them in. She was headmistress of the school, and had been told to expect their arrival. Perrin waited as the others entered, counting off his men and women, one more time for good measure. Finally, when all were accounted for, he pulled the gate closed behind him, then hurried along the line of soldiers to the front. Here Idrian hissed at them to be quiet, then glanced at the sky and pulled open the back door to the school proper. Perrin stepped through it and into a place full of odd scents. Something acrid he couldn't place mixed with the aroma of flowers that had been crushed. Odd scents that he associated with baking, the sodas and yeasts, but none of the comfortable smells like those of baking bread that should accompany them. As the others of his group entered, he stepped forward, sniffing at a room that reeked of a tannery. What was happening in this strange place, and why did he smell old bones from that room across the hall? He would have expected the scholars to be sleeping, but as the headmistress led them down the broad hall, Perrin passed several rooms with lights burning. In one, an extremely tall man with long hair and fingers worked beside a contraption of some sort. It had wires and coils and pieces growing out of the floor like some kind of metal tree. Lights burned on the table in front of the scholar, inside of little glass globes. They were steady lights that didn't flicker at all. "Is that an Ashaman?" Galad asked, stepping up beside Perrin. "I see no weaves," Grady whispered, joining them as Arganda moved his troops through the hall behind. "Then he's figured out how to harness the one power using only metal and coils?" Galad asked, smelling troubled. He seemed to consider the idea to be very disturbing. Perrin shook his head and ushered the other two forward, worried about drawing the scholar's attention. The man didn't even look up, however, as if oblivious to the footfalls and hushed conversations in the hall. Perrin hurried onward, passing underneath a model hanging from the ceiling. It looked like a wooden man with wings attached to his arms, as if they were intended to make him fly. Another room smelled of old dust and was filled entirely with bones, but from no animal Perrin recognized. Eventually, Idrian led them through a very small door, perhaps a servant's door, out into the mansion's gardens. Perrin knew what to expect, as Loyal had explained, at length, of course, about his trip here with Rand. The waygate was in its own walled enclosure within the gardens. Sitting on the ground, there was a balding fellow with a heap of star charts staring up at the sky. What he expected to see through the cloud cover was beyond Perrin. "I thought you were told to keep everyone away," Perrin said, hurrying up to the headmistress. "Oh, don't mind Gavel," she said. She had a musical voice. "He's not right in the head. We let him study the ways, you see." "You let someone in?" Perrin demanded. "We are here to study and learn," she replied, voice hardening. "He knew the risks, and he only stuck his head in for a brief moment. That was enough. When we pulled him back out, he was staring and mumbling. Now he rants about a sky with no stars and draws star charts all day. But they're nonsense. At least he charts a sky that I've never seen." She glanced at Perrin then, smelling of shame, looked away. "We've never opened it again. Not since that Ogier showed up and chastised us for what we'd done. Of course, we couldn't have opened it on our own anyway, as he took the key with him when he left." Perrin said nothing. He led his group into the small enclosure, and there was the waygate, a portal of stone worked with incredibly intricate vine and leaf patterns. Perrin hadn't done much work in stone. The closest had been a fanciful attempt at molds for casting silver, at which Master Luhan had laughed, as if there would ever be enough silver in the Two Rivers to waste on an apprentice's practice molds. Still, the masterwork sculpting on the waygates had always struck Perrin. The creators had made this stonework look almost as if it were alive. "Thank you, Mistress Tarson," Perrin said. "This will get me to the Two Rivers quietly without anyone knowing where we've gone." Perrin glanced at Galad, who blessedly didn't say anything. The man could be perniciously honest at times and hadn't liked the idea of lying about their destination. But Perrin figured he should do anything he could to point the shadow in the wrong direction, even starting deliberately false rumors. "You may go," Perrin told the headmistress. but forbid anyone from even entering this garden. Barricade the doors, and don't worry about us. Remember the warning you got earlier. The Shadow might very well be planning to send troops here through this portal. It might feel quiet in this city, but you're actually sitting right on the front lines of the war." She nodded, though she didn't smell as concerned as she probably should have. Well, perhaps she was just good at controlling her fear of the Waygates. They'd long known that the Shadow was using them, and Rand had stationed guards here during most of the school's existence. A few guards wouldn't do much more than a locked door, unfortunately. This Waygate needed channelers who could travel watching it permanently, whom Rand would send once he could spare them. Or, well, if he could spare them. Mistress Tarson retreated out the door, locking it behind her. Not that a lock would do much to stop Trollocs. Indeed, far stronger precautions had proven useless. The Waygate in Camelin had been locked tight like this one behind the wall of stone that protected the entrance. Perrin moved his soldiers back, leaving only the channelers and his attendants near the Waygate itself. Then he nodded to Grady. "All right, Grady," he said. "Bring it down." Saren folded her arms, and Perrin braced himself for another objection. The Aes Sedai, and Saren in particular, hadn't liked this part of the plan. The fierce brown sister had objected to the destruction of such an ancient relic. Fortunately, she said nothing as Grady stepped up and adopted a look of concentration. Apparently, Perrin's explanations had satisfied her. The barrier had meant nothing to the enemy in Camelin. It might as well not have existed for all the good it had done the people there. Right now, the only chance this city, and Camelin itself, had was for Perrin to find a method of shutting these Waygates permanently from the inside. "All right, my lord," Grady said. "Brace yourself." With that, the Ashaman blasted open the Waygate's stone covering. The explosion ripped the barrier into several pieces, though the resulting pop was muted, as if it had come from many paces away. The chunks, rather than spraying chips of stone across the soldiers, hung in the air, then floated down and settled onto the path right in front of the Waygate. Perrin felt a pang at the destruction, more so because he had ordered it. But no smith could be so attached to a piece that he couldn't see the need to melt it down when its time came. Now that the stone covering was gone, Perrin's breath caught, and he took one of the lanterns and raised it high. The opening exposed a glassy surface like a mirror, but one that reflected poorly. A shadowy version of Perrin, holding aloft the lantern, confronted him. Loyal had said that once the Waygates had shone like bright mirrors, back when they'd had light of their own within. The ancient portal rested peacefully as Grady dusted off his hands. Perrin stepped up, listening, looking. The last time Rand had tried to use this Waygate, something had been waiting for him on the other side. The Black Wind. Today, however, Perrin heard no calls for blood or death, felt no assault on his mind. He saw nothing but the shadowy version of himself, golden eyes seeming to glow in the lantern light as he searched for hints of danger. He could spot none. It seemed that Machen Shin was not lurking in wait for them this time. He released his held breath as, behind him, Seonad spoke thoughtfully to Grady. "That was well done, with the explosion, Ashaman. Did you use air to muffle the sound somehow?" Grady nodded, wiping his brow with a handkerchief. "Been practicing how to do that lately. Explosions can be handy, but we can't be shattering everyone's eardrums with each one now, can we?" "The noise of the channeling is the one we must fear more," Saren said briskly. "We should be quick, just in case." "Agreed," Perrin said. He turned back to the troops who had watched the display with stoic faces. This lot was as used to channeling as common men ever could be, he supposed. "Arganda and Galen?" "Yes, Lord Golden Eyes," Galen said, alongside a simple "yes" from Arganda. Both smelled eager. "You may enter. Together." They didn't seem to like that, but both stepped up to the dull, glassy surface, as if approaching versions of themselves from the shadowy realm beyond. With the entire rock face removed, the opening was wide enough for two men, barely. Arganda reached up and tapped the surface, his finger seeming to meld with that of his dim reflection. He shuddered visibly as his finger stuck into it rather than meeting something solid. He looked at Galen, and the other man nodded, his slotted helmet under his arm. Together they stepped forward, their faces meeting those of their mirror images as they merged with the reflective surface, stepping into the ways. A moment later, Arganda turned back, his torso breaking from the surface, causing no ripples, and leaning out. "There is a modestly sized stone field on this side as described, Lord Goldeneyes. We see no signs of the shadow, or of this wind you mentioned." "All right," Perrin said to the others. "In you go. One at a time, and go slowly, understand? I'll go last." Galad stepped up to him as the soldiers began to file through. He watched the waygate with troubled eyes. "I've been trying to convince the children that we need not walk in dark paths in order to follow the light." "Sometimes you must walk a dark path," Perrin said, "because there is no other way forward. That doesn't mean you need to let it get inside you. That's something the children never seem to be able to figure out." "I'm not a fool, Perrin," Galad said. "I realize that distinction. But if we intend to resist the shadow without embracing evil methods, how can we justify using this place?" "The ways aren't evil," Perrin said. "The fact that the shadow has corrupted them doesn't change that they were made for a good purpose. The real corruption is shadow spawn using it to attack us." Galad thought for a time, then nodded. "I will accept that argument. You have a good logic about you, Perrin Ebara." He stepped up next and, without breaking stride or smelling the least bit worried, passed through the gate. "Complemented by a white cloak," Seonad said to Perrin, waiting as her warders passed through. "How does that feel?" "Odd," Perrin admitted. "Go on in, and remember not to channel once inside." "You keep saying this," Adara said as she stepped up. The Aiel Wise One had pale yellow hair and seemed young, though of course that was deceptive when Wise Ones were concerned. She inspected her shadowy reflection with a critical eye. "Why bring 5 people who can channel, then tell us not to use the one power?" "Never swing an axe carelessly, Adara," Perrin said. "The power will be corrupted inside, almost like the taint that was upon Sayedin. We will probably have to use the power to pull off this plan, but let's not be foolhardy about it." Idara finally entered, and though the Wise One didn't bow her head or betray an anxious step, she did smell distinctly of nervousness. Seonid, in turn, smelled of a strange mix of emotions. Something had happened between the two Aes Sedai and the Wise Ones. Perrin didn't know exactly what it had been, but it seemed to be over now. And strangely, Seonid seemed more respectful of the Aiel than she had of Egwene or the other senior Aes Sedai. "Keep that white cloak at arm's length, Lord Ebara," Seonid said after Adara passed. "His type turns on a man quickly once he finds fault. I've seen it 12 times." She strode into the waygate, followed by the last of the Aiel, all save Gaul, who waited with Perrin. "We have a saying in the Threefold Land," Gaul noted. "The Gango lizard will happily feed on your arm, while the asp bites your leg. I think that one's advice could be applied to herself." "I trust them both," Perrin said. "Seonid can be brusque, but she acts with honesty. And Galad is straightforward. If he does turn on me, I don't doubt he'll explain his reasons completely beforehand. I'd rather have that than a dozen attendants who tell me what I want to hear and scheme behind my back." Perrin scratched at his beard. "Odd. Rand would always talk like that too, and he ended up with a bunch of scheming toadies anyway." Gaul laughed. "I would not call it odd, Perrin Ebara. Not odd at all." After Gaul had passed through, Perrin stepped up, as if confronting himself in the reflective surface. He had entered the ways only twice. First, so long ago with Moraine. Then again when he'd returned with Loyal to the Two Rivers. It felt like an eternity had passed since either of those events. Indeed, it seemed a completely different person looked back at him from inside the waygate. a hard man with a weathered beard, thick like the fur of a wolf, whose instincts knew to anticipate a particularly harsh winter. But Perrin could look that man in his golden eyes and feel at peace with him. Both man and reflection slid their hammers into the loops at their sides, and both knew that this time, though wary, they would not smell of fear. He stepped forward and touched the surface of the gate, which felt icy, like water washing across him. The moment stretched. Indeed, Perrin almost felt as if he were stretching, like a thick piece of tar. Finally, though, he slid through and stepped firmly on the other side, entering the infinite blackness. Chapter 2. Pathways into the Vast Nothing. The men had opened their lanterns, holding the poles out toward the darkness, but the light didn't extend around them as far as it should have. Perrin had braced himself for this feeling of oppressive darkness, but still it weighed on him. The darkness felt thick here, pressing against the light, hedging it in, penning it. Other than the waygate, which from this side showed a view of the garden as if through dirty glass, the surroundings were utterly featureless. Just the smooth stone below their feet, marked with a faded white line leading away from the waygate, and the darkness. That darkness. Most of the soldiers, though battle-hardened, huddled together in a large group. Perrin knew that feeling. In here you wanted the reassurance of having someone at your side. Though he knew it was an illusion, it was hard to shake the notion that the darkness was some liquid pouring in, constantly closing on the light and inching towards smothering it. The air smelled of nothing, stale, dead. A couple of the white cloaks had started out to the side as if to look around at the back of the waygate. Perrin signaled for them to fall into ranks, then cross the stone ground, which was pocked with pits and furrows, almost as if by the weathering of time, though there was no natural wind here. Each group of soldiers formed a small rank, 2 lines of 5. The Aiel, of course, ignored the command as if it didn't apply to them, and Perrin supposed that it didn't. They prowled about in pairs or trios, watching the darkness as if for something to stab. He didn't know that he'd ever smelled them so jittery. Not afraid, but certainly not completely comfortable with this place either. As Perrin was counting ranks, he noted, with shock, that Gaul wasn't anywhere nearby. In the time it had taken Perrin to enter, he had vanished into the dark. Before Perrin could ask after him, however, a single light approached, bobbing in the darkness. Gaul loped back up to the group, carrying a lantern. "The guiding is intact, Perrin Ebara," he said. "No sign of Trollocs that I could see. No scorch marks of cooking fires or discarded bones. They may be moving through the ways, but they did not stop near here." "Good work," Perrin said. Then, under his breath, asked, "Showing off for the maidens?" Gaul laughed so hard, Perrin would have thought someone had slipped the man some brandy in his canteen. Gaul wiped a tear from his eye. "He asks if I'm showing off for the maidens," he said to Sulin as she walked by. She immediately burst into laughter. It seemed incongruous in this dark place. "You are a good man, Perrin Ebara," Gaul said, slapping him on the shoulder, "to give levity in these times. Showing off for the maidens. As if that hadn't already sent me across such hot sands." He chuckled again, and he smelled completely earnest. Aiel, Perrin thought. He waved for them all to move forward, the 2 riversmen bringing the pack animals as they followed the white-painted line on the ground. The waygate disappeared behind them, and for a time they seemed to be making no progress, like they were walking on an unending path in the inky darkness with no frame of reference or landmark other than the occasional sickly gouge in the stone underfoot. Their footfalls seemed softer in this place, and their voices didn't carry. It was as if, upon reaching the darkness, the very sound was strangled. Finally, their light revealed a tall stone breaking the landscape. A worked rock slab, set on its end, seemed to appear from nothing. Perrin halted the men, set them watching out into the darkness as if on guard, and approached the guiding with only the Aes Sedai, Ashaman, and Wise One. The stone was inset with a delicate script, made of metal and worked so fine that Perrin couldn't imagine the time and effort it would have taken to fill the slab. Considering the fine swirls and leaf patterns, just one sentence of this Ogier script seemed as if it would take months. They didn't need to rely solely upon the script, however. As they gathered near the pillar, huddling perhaps closer together than they might have in another place, Saren took out a small notebook. "Elviaran's notes," she said, lighting the book with her lantern, "are confirmed by the more crude directions we found upon the Myrddral's corpse." She inspected the slab, moving her fingers over sections of scroll work that were reproduced in the notebook. "Yes, I think this will be enough to get us to Caemlyn." "How difficult can it be?" Neald asked. The young Mirandian's usual exuberance was muted by that darkness, but he smelled of determination. Perrin had once been tempted to think of Neald as a boy. He hadn't yet hit 18 winters, but after all they'd been through together, well, there were few men Perrin would rather have at his back than Fugger Neald. "The Shadow is able to move thousands upon thousands of Trollocs through this place. If they can navigate the path, then surely you can, Saren Sedai." "I doubt the Dark One sheds a tear if he loses the occasional troop of shadow spawn to this endless dark," Saren said. "I, however, would rather not risk such a fate. My own skill in this script is lacking, and I wouldn't dare lead us on my own. But near as I can determine, the notes are accurate. The third bridge on the right should have a post in front with these markings here. If so, we are on the proper course." "Let's see these ramps," Seonad said, businesslike as always, "and perform the test we agreed upon. Final decisions about moving forward should be predicated upon the results." Perrin nodded, passing orders to the soldiers to guard the retreat and keep their ears open. Then the small group of channelers, along with Gol and Sulin, who trailed behind like shadows, headed to the right, reaching an area where bridges split off from the ground, arcing into the darkness. He hated how structures like this seemed to appear out of nowhere. They didn't catch the light in the distance as one might expect. Instead, they emerged from the too thick darkness once the light grew close, as if reluctantly surrendered. Regardless, here at the edge, the structure of the ways really started to defy explanation. Bridges split off the main path and reached out into the darkness, pathways into the vast nothing. In addition, stone ramps wound upward or downward, splitting off the main path and leading to what Perrin knew would be fields of stone identical to the one they now stood upon. Except these fields, best he could tell, were directly above or below the one they stood upon. There seemed to be no way that the structures could support themselves. He'd once tried to sketch it out, and it seemed that the stone fields must be disks, or perhaps islands, hanging in the nothing, connected by networks of ramps and bridges. He'd eventually abandoned his drawing because he couldn't say for certain if his perception was correct or not. The darkness of this place, the way it twisted the eyes and mind, made it difficult to judge distances. Trying to impose a visual structure on it had been like building a blacksmith's puzzle with no actual solution. As others inspected the bridges and ramps, he could see several of them, Neald included, trying to wrap their minds around it, perhaps sketch it out in their heads. He caught Idara shaking her head and muttering under her breath as she looked up, then down. Well, he had warned them. "The post with the inscription is where the notes said it would be," Saren said, stepping back up to him. Perrin nodded, then waved Grady over. "All right, Jur. Let's do this." The others gathered around him again, and he could smell their apprehension. Good, that meant he'd properly impressed upon them the danger of what they were about to do. Jur Grady, appearing almost as weathered as these stones, adopted a look of concentration. He seized the power. "Do something small," Perrin said. "We need to know." Grady held a hand out in front of him and summoned a globe of yellow light, letting it hover above his fingertips. He grimaced, smelling of anger. "Blood and ashes. That's something I never wanted to feel again. It's like the taint was never cleansed. How can it still be here in this place?" "It persists here," Saren said. "Oddly, I can feel it too, so it's not just the men. It's like rot on a dismembered part of the body, continuing to fester after the corpse itself has been burned." "All right, sure," Perrin said, pointing toward a particular bridge they weren't going to be using, one that was pocked on the side, degraded by whatever affliction was progressively making the ways decay. "Take a small piece off that bridge there." Grady stretched his hand out and released a small jet of light and flame. Though Perrin couldn't see the weaves, he could tell, instinctively, that something was wrong with this one. The flame had a sickly brown cast to it, unlike any flame he'd seen in real life. Grady, often stoic when he channeled, smelled suddenly of nausea and discomfort. His blast of fire broke the knob of stone off the bridge, dropping it into the void below. He immediately released the power and heaved out a sigh. Together, they grew still. Perrin strained, listening in the darkness for even a hint of wind. He was ready to abandon this entire endeavor and would do so in the blink of an eye if he thought they might have alerted Machin Shin to come for them. He heard nothing, smelled nothing. Grady spat to the side, something Perrin didn't think he'd ever seen the man do. "It's not exactly the same as the taint was, but that just makes it a different kind of awful. Back then I felt like I was reaching through oil to touch the power. Here, something was corrupting my channeling as I used it. Like I'd finished half of my meal and only then found worms in the bread." "How hard was it to destroy that piece of stone?" Perrin said, nodding with his chin. "It crumbled like powder, my lord," Grady said. Like it wasn't stone at all, but dried clay." "So we can do it," Neald said. The plan that Perrin had presented after hours of thought and work was relatively simple. Their small group would find its way to the waygate into Camelin. Once there, they would destroy the bridges and ramps leading to that particular island in the darkness, isolating it. These bridges were long, expansive things. Destroying them would effectively cut Camelin off, denying their enemies the ability to resupply forces behind Rand's battle lines. The chance to completely isolate armies of Shadowspawn was worth risking a trip into the ways. Accomplishing it, however, relied upon two things: their ability to navigate, and their ability to actually damage the stonework pathways that led to Camelin. Both now seemed confirmed. "We move forward, then," Perrin said. "Into the darkness." Chapter 3. As if into eternity itself. Perrin led the way across another graceful stone bridge arcing out into the darkness. Hours into the trip, and it still felt as if they'd made no progress. He remembered this sensation from before, the nagging worry that somehow it was all an illusion, that he was leaving one island and being wound around to arrive back in the same spot. He found himself strangely grateful for the broken patches in the stone. They at least were different on each island or bridge. He just wished that Grady's words didn't hang over him as they did. It crumbled like powder, as if he hadn't already felt nervous walking across stonework he knew had no support underneath it. Arganda walked nearby, periodically looking over the edge of the bridge. Perrin resisted. He had no need to stare down into that darkness, as if into eternity itself. Eventually, they reached the end of this particular bridge and walked out onto another nondescript field of stone. Their lights could never fully illuminate these places. He just wished he could see it all, rather than experiencing it from within these little bubbles of light that didn't extend far enough. The soldiers had clumped together as they walked, and Perrin fell back to give them some encouraging words. This place did strange things to the mind. It was difficult to stay alert crossing bridge after bridge with no sense of time or place. They reached the next guiding. This one was in far worse shape than others. Barely any of the writing was legible. Saren approached and pulled out her notebook, then waved for one of the Mayenners to bring his lamp closer. She squinted at the stone and ran her fingers along it. "Such damage," she said softly. "It's all deteriorating, like a cube of sugar left out in the rain." "Can you find the way?" Perrin asked. She consulted the book, then led them around to a ramp leading downward. Perrin did a quick count of everyone as they passed. Saren stood next to him, flipping pages in the notebook. He hadn't known her as long as some of the others, but her direct manner didn't seem much like other members of the Brown Aja he'd known. He liked that, and had accepted quickly when she volunteered for this mission. "You're doing well," he told her once the count was done. Together, the two of them started down the ramp, last, save for the Aiel who had taken the rearguard position. "I was worried about this part." "The instructions are clear," she said. "The notes include directions to only a few waygates, but those instructions are very deliberate and clear. I'm less worried about getting lost than I am about this being some kind of trap or misdirection." Perrin nodded, though a part of him was concerned by how indifferently she said it. If there was one thing Loyal had impressed on him, it was that the ways were not to be taken lightly. It seemed almost foolhardy to be in here without the Ogier to guide him. Loyal had not only been able to read the guidings, but his constant warnings, the sheer edge of his concern, had imparted a reluctance to them all. Perhaps Perrin needed to take that role. He'd given in to letting the Aiel prowl ahead of and behind the group, as was their custom in any situation, but Loyal had never allowed even Lan to scout for them in the ways. "This place," Saren said, "is different than the records describe. The darkness isn't the darkness of night, but of something else entirely. We've entered a different place with different rules than our world." "You've studied the ways?" Perrin asked her, carefully prodding for more information. She'd been hesitant during their meetings to plan this expedition, to reveal all she knew, but he was accustomed to that from Aes Sedai by now. "I have dedicated my life to the most useful knowledge I could find," Saren said, "and to its practical application." "Practical application?" Perrin prodded. "Nobody uses the ways anymore," Saren said, looking up into the absolute blackness. "That makes them all the more interesting, as there is an obvious power to be found here. A power that, before traveling was rediscovered, was unique." He smelled a curiosity to her, carefully controlled, and not much fear. "You've traveled them before," Perrin said. "Haven't you?" "Only a fool would enter the ways," she replied. "Everyone knows that." An Aes Sedai answer for certain. She likely didn't know how much of the truth Perrin could smell on her. Still, he left the topic for now, instead walking up past the two Rivers men and the pack animals, where he cautioned the men to be extra quiet. He didn't want to dampen their moods further, but, well, better gloomy than dead. Or worse. He moved up along the line until he was at the front, leading the way into the deep. He was accustomed to being able to see farther than other men, but he wasn't convinced that worked in here. It was hard to tell, as there really wasn't anything to see. At least the Aiel weren't prowling too far ahead. The five at the foreguard stayed just in front of the main line. As Perrin arrived at the front, Gall fell back and joined him. "It looks worse than before," Gall said softly. He had his veil down, but seemed about an inch from sliding it on. "If that is possible." He was right. As they reached the next guiding, Saren led them to one of the spiraling ramps which led straight down into more darkness. On the way down, Perrin had to step around holes in one side of the ramp or the other. There were pocks in the middle, too, like places in a road where one cobblestone had been pried up and carried away. He joined Galad at the bottom, where the tall white cloak was looking back upward, smelling strongly of distaste. Perrin knew that feeling, the uncanny sensation that the place they'd left earlier should be right on top of them, somehow held up by no pillars or other supports. "This structure should collapse," Galad said. "A thing of the shadow, this is. The natural world does not work in such a manner." "We're not in the natural world, Galad," Perrin said. "We are—" Perrin trailed off. What was that hushed sound? Distant wind or just a rustle of motion from one of the others? His hairs stood up on his arms as he felt a chill run through his body. He strained to hear over the hushed voices of others whispering, of hooves quietly clopping on the stone. Sound seemed dampened here, muffled. Over it all, he heard nothing. It was nothing. He was mostly certain. Galad cocked his head at Perrin. Most of the party was settling down on the island beyond the ramp, digging out rations for the midday meal, though they could only guess at the actual time and judge their meals by number of bridges or ramps crossed. "Is all well?" Galad asked. "As well as it can be in this place," Perrin said, though he caught Grady by the arm as he passed. "My Lord Golden Eyes?" Grady asked. "Jur," Perrin said. "If we encounter the wind, if it finds us, don't wait for my orders. Hit it with everything you have." Grady eyed Galad, then spoke more softly. "Will it work? You know that something's wrong with the one power here. Well, that thing you described. Will it even react to the power? Rand says he drove the Black Wind back once. He told me he used the one power to push it back into the Waygate when it seemed ready to reach out and snatch him. If Machin Shin comes for us, that will be our only recourse. Understand?" "I understand. And we will be ready. I'll let Niald know." He saluted, then withdrew. Galad watched Grady go, smelling of nothing specific, actually. Perrin had expected loathing. "No jibes, Galad?" Perrin asked. "No commentary on the evils of the One Power?" "I have never thought of the One Power as evil," Galad replied. "It is merely another tool for men to use. Any power or authority, however, does have a tendency to corrupt. The signs of this are all over the White Tower. You disagree?" "No, actually," Perrin said. "The Ashaman are terrible and worrisome," Galad said. "But upon consideration, I also find them noble. To take the lot they have been given and try to use it to help rather than harm is commendable. More commendable would be to seek gentling. Few men are willing to take a step so severe, however, despite it being right." "Right no longer," Perrin said, "with the source cleansed." "Not completely, if this place is a guide." Light, Perrin thought. I hope he doesn't mention this conversation to the other White Cloaks. Some of them might take this as proof that the Ashaman were still not to be trusted. Few of the White Cloaks were as rational as Galad. Dane Bornhold, who passed by near the end of the line, was a good example. The young man still smelled hateful when he was around Perrin, and, strangely, guilty. Perrin understood the hatred. Although Dane no longer believed Perrin had killed his father, that didn't wipe away old biases or dislikes. But why the guilt? Was it because Bornhold had been forced by duty to kill his friend? Bornhold often smelled of brandy lately. Perrin didn't give the soldiers long for their break. Moraine had always kept them moving, making them eat while riding, and Perrin was inclined to trust her wisdom in this. He soon ordered everyone forward with further reminders to remain quiet, and they fell back into the rhythm of this place, marching through the too quiet darkness, pausing briefly at each guiding, and again at each bridge or ramp to check the markings. As they reached the end of each ramp or bridge, the Aiel scouted forward to check for signs of Trollocs. None but the Aiel volunteered for the duty, but Perrin did not let them scout far. He remembered Loyal's cautious warnings, imagining how easily even a careful scout might get lost in this darkness. Perrin would be forced to abandon them in such a case, and so leave them to wander alone in the darkness until thirst, or madness, took them. Near the end of the first day of marching, they encountered a problem that Perrin had been dreading: a broken bridge. He stepped up to the gap, joining the Aiel scouts at the edge. The decomposing stonework here had given way, dumping a 10-foot or longer chunk of stone into the abyss. Perrin knelt at the edge, feeling at the jagged, broken stone remaining. He could see the other side of the bridge, at the very limit of their light, where it presumably continued until it touched the next island over. Below lay only blackness. Would a man who fell drop until he starved, or would he hit one of the other islands first? "I think I could jump that," said Aviellen, one of the maidens. "A long jump indeed," Sulin said. "The wetlanders could not make it, that is for certain. No offense to you, Perrin Ibarra." "None taken," he said, shivering at the thought of even trying. He turned, asking for Idara and the Aes Sedai. They approached, Saren and Idara pointedly ignoring one another. Perhaps Saren had heard of how Seonid had been treated. Of course, Seonid was also one of the women who had sworn to Rand, so maybe... Perrin hesitated. No colors. Usually when he thought of Rand, colors spun in his vision, showing an image of the man wherever he was. Not this time. Were the ways, in some manner, related to the wolf dream? He didn't see the visions there, either. The group gathered with him a few steps away from the crumbled edge of the bridge. "I've encountered broken bridges before," Perrin said. "I was hoping that, by using a mapped-out path, we'd avoid the problem. This break must be more recent." "What did you do the last time?" Seonid asked. "Loyal took us around another way," Perrin said. Together they looked at Saren. She displayed quintessential Aes Sedai composure as she met Perrin's eyes, then shook her head. "One measure of a woman's strength is her willingness to accept her limits. I do not think I can navigate in this place on my own. I would be willing to try if pressed, but I barely know enough to determine we're going in the right direction with these instructions." Perrin chewed on that, considering. "Make us a bridge." "With what stone?" Saren asked, amused. "No stone," Perrin said. "Air. I know it can be done." Saren didn't respond at first. "That's a wide gap, Golden Eyes. It might be too wide for me." "Idara can help." "It's not simply a matter of strength. The size of a bridge made of air has strict limits. With that landing on the other side, well, it may be possible, but dangerous. Not only because the one power is tainted in this place. I will be required to anchor air against the broken stone on both sides. The bridge could crumble further and dump everyone on it." Perrin nodded, rubbing at his beard. "See if you can make the bridge first," he said. "If it holds, we'll send people across one at a time." The others seemed to take this decision as reasonable. Saren spoke with Seonid and Idara in hushed tones, and then all three adopted a look of concentration. Though it had been happening for a while, it still surprised Perrin sometimes when people, including Aes Sedai and wise ones, did what he said. "This is not a pleasant experience," Saren said to him, "but perhaps I can see it as a useful one. Is this really how men used to feel while channeling?" "Worse," Grady said from beside Perrin. "The bridge is in place," Saren said. "We will need someone to test to see if it holds." Before any of the Aiel could volunteer, Perrin stepped out into the gap. A couple of the Wolf Guard gasped, but Perrin's foot fell on something hard. He couldn't see it, but it felt as firm as stone under his boot. "Eyes forward," he told himself, and took the next step. He kept his hand on his hammer as he walked. The warmth inside the metal was comforting, and tried not to think about the expanse of nothingness beneath him. Sweat trickled down the sides of his face. Never had he been so glad to touch stone as he was when he took that last step. Perrin let out a deep breath and turned to see Gaul coming next. The man could have been taking a nice evening stroll. He stopped and tapped his foot on the side of the invisible bridge, then leaned out over the darkness. Crazy Aiel, Perrin thought. He was showing off, even if he wouldn't admit it. The maidens came next, one at a time, and though a few repeated Gaul's feat, none fell off. Perrin sent Gaul and the maidens on to inspect the next island, with cautions to remain close, but he wanted to wait until every person had crossed. He all but held his breath the entire time. He could stomach men dying in battle under his leadership. He didn't like it, but he could stomach it. Having one fall off here, though, well, that would haunt him all his days. He knew it as sure as he knew his own name. Eventually, only the channelers and the white cloaks remained. Grady and Niald came one at a time, as steady as the Aiel had been, though Perrin could smell their nervousness. That left Galad and his men. Perrin could see their hesitation from across the gap, though he couldn't smell it. Some members of the White Cloak army had refused healing by Aes Sedai on previous occasions. "Well," Perrin called, "you demanded to come with me into this place. Cross now or be left in the darkness." Galad came first. Perrin nodded to him as he arrived. For once, the man smelled anxious. "What was it you said?" Perrin asked. "The one power is merely another tool?" "Perhaps the merely was said in haste," Galad said, looking back at the bridge of air as Bornhald began to cross. "It is a tool, yes, but so is fire, and I would not much like to walk a similar distance with it underfoot." Perrin grunted. "Well, so long as—" Something cracked near Perrin's feet. Perrin didn't hesitate. He swung an arm out, lunging toward Bornhald, who had nearly arrived. The young man stared at his feet in horror as the stonework nearest Perrin crumbled away, dumping Bornhald and the bridge into the darkness. Perrin caught Bornhald by the collar of his shirt, but the move left him precariously standing with one foot halfway over the broken edge of the bridge, tipping. He grunted, holding tight as Bornhald screamed, flinging his arms up. He took hold of Perrin's arm, overbalancing him. Perrin met the young man's eyes, and held on. "Light!" Galad said, grabbing Perrin from behind and pulling him upright. Bornhald swung, dangling over the divide. The force of his swinging almost pulled all three of them over. But after what seemed an eternal moment, something seized them all, something unseen, and pushed them back onto the stone bridge. The three tumbled into a heap, Bornhald gasping, nearly crying. Galad sat up and rubbed the elbow he'd struck when he fell. Perrin took a deep breath, then sat up. He started to call thanks to the Aes Sedai and Wise One for the threads of air that had saved them. Then he saw Niald standing just a short distance away, hand out. "Blood and bloody ashes, Lord Perrin," he said. "Light, I'm sorry I almost missed you. I didn't hear a thing until Bornhald screamed." "You did well, Fogger," Perrin said, dusting himself off as he stood, mostly because he wanted to be moving to keep himself from shaking. "You saved our lives." "You reacted quickly, Aybara," Galad said as Perrin helped him to his feet. "How did you do it?" "I heard the stone cracking," Perrin said. "That's all." "I heard no cracking," Galad said, shaking his head. "Those wolf's ears of yours. Is it a thing another man can learn, do you suppose?" Perrin found himself gaping. You'd want to learn it?" "Studying your talents would help me determine whether they serve the light or not," Galad said, sounding perfectly rational. "I've accepted that wolves are not of the Dark One. At least, if they are, I have no evidence of it. I see no problem, yet, in a man learning what you do." "I doubt the wolves would like you," Perrin said, then found himself chuckling despite the darkness, despite the near fall. He'd been cursed, hunted, and feared because of his eyes. But never, never had someone asked if it would be possible to emulate him. Now the question came, and from a white cloak, no less. Galad crouched beside Bornhald. "Are you well, Dane?" Yes, Lord Captain Commander. Yes, I think I will be." Bornhald reached for the flask at his belt. Galad allowed him a single pull on it, then gently took it and tossed it over the side of the bridge. Dane watched it go, smelling horrified, but Perrin shook his head, still amused. Galad was nothing if not consistent. Galad helped Bornhald to his feet. "I'll see him the rest of the way across. Someone should walk with him. But first—" He turned toward the broken bridge, where the remaining white cloaks stood with the Aes Sedai and Adara. "Well?" he called. "Can you make another?" "We can," Adara called back. "Do it!" he shouted, probably for the benefit of his men. "It takes more than a threat of death to unnerve the children. We will walk in the light even in this place, Aiel." Galad nodded to Perrin, then moved on, holding a lantern pole in one hand and resting his other hand on the obviously shaken Bornhold's shoulder. Lights send we don't run into any more gaps, Perrin thought, as the rest of the children made their way across the new bridge, one at a time. He doubted they'd coax Bornhold across another. Chapter 4. The Touch of the Blacksmith. It's all right to be afraid of something, Perrin said. Bornhold looked up. He'd been sitting by himself at the edge of the pool of light. Around them, the group made camp for its first night in the ways. This section of stone seemed a little less degraded than others, and Perrin tried to imagine the ways as Loyal had described them. Bright and sunlit, a place of life and warmth. When he tried to picture that, the looming darkness always intruded, just as it seemed to want to intrude upon their camp, lurking outside the light. To keep it back, they'd set a ring of lanterns, and within it were laying out bedrolls and getting notes on watch shifts from Arganda. Remarkably, everyone seemed to be taking the mood well, adjusting to the gloom of this place. Though they kept their voices low by Perrin's orders, some of the Gildanin and Mayenners were chuckling together, trading friendly barbs as they arranged themselves for sleep. Perrin smiled at that, glad to see those two groups in particular getting along. More remarkably, a few of the white cloaks joined in as well, laughing at some joke. Was it possible that even these harsh men could find common ground with the others? Not Bornhold, however. The young Terrabonner sat alone. He seemed a naturally thin man, but during his time in Perrin's camp, he'd grown almost skeletal. "I'm not frightened," Bornhold spat, then took a bite of bread. Perrin settled down. That earned him a glare. "Look," Perrin said softly, "we have differences, but you're under my command now. The last battle is upon us. There isn't time for grudges anymore." Bornhold continued eating. "Is this about your father?" Perrin asked. "Jeff from—" "Don't!" Bornhold stopped, took a deep breath, then continued, "Don't speak his name. Just don't. Please. This isn't about him." "Then it's about Bayer." "I don't want your help, Ibarra," Bornhold said. "I don't want your sympathy. I'll control myself. Leave me be." "Fine." Perrin sighed and stood up. He walked back toward the center of the light, where Galad, hands clasped behind his back, was surveying his men as they made camp. "There's something big troubling Bornhold," Perrin said. His near fall shook him. "Dane has been increasingly unreliable lately," Galad said. "Tell me, Ibarra, does the name Ordeith mean anything to you?" Perrin drew in a sharp breath. "Yes. Dane keeps muttering that name. Ordeith is a dark friend," Perrin said. "No, he's something worse. He's the man who brought Trollocs to the Two Rivers. He'd pretended to join the children, but was really just toying with them, using them for something. I'm not exactly sure what it was. Probably an attempt to draw Rand's attention." "Might I note," Galad said, "that you have been accused of the same things, bringing Trollocs to the Two Rivers, and that you argued lack of evidence sufficient to convict? Do you have any way of proving to me that one of the children was guilty of this crime?" "He's not one of the children, Galad," Perrin said, glancing back at Bornhold. "As for proof, once we're out of here I can give you a number of witnesses to the crimes this man has committed. For now, Light, did Ordeith give anything to Bornhold?" Bornhold had a little of the same cast to him that Matt had back when the dagger had claimed him. "I will ask," Galad said, "and I will speak with the other children about this Ordeith, to see if any of them have met him." Perrin nodded, accepting a hunk of jerky and some cheese from Tam, who brought it over when he saw Perrin hadn't eaten anything. At times, the Two Rivers men mothered him as much as any woman might. Still, he was happy to tear into the food as he walked over to the Aiel. He'd just noticed Gall and Aviellen returning. The group was camping near the guiding, and he'd reluctantly agreed to allow the two Aiel to go across the next bridge and scout the landing. "More signs of Trollocs on the next island, Perrin Ibarra," Gall said. "Bones in a pile. Some paintings in red on the ground. Might be blood. A few days old, at least. Light. What did the shadow spawn do? Bring people with them to eat along the way? Is that why they were so focused on taking Kandor? Perrin wondered. To gain prisoners for food? The thought made him sick. We listened into the dark, Gall said, but could hear no sign of them in the distance. But who knows? Trollocs can be quiet, if they are on a tight leash, and this place seems to warp sound in ways I cannot anticipate. They didn't destroy the guiding as you feared, Aviellen said. It was kept completely clean, with no Trolloc markings on the ground nearby. Perrin nodded. He'd thought that, with the existence of the notebooks, the Myrddraal might break the guidings. That wouldn't much change this mission, but it would be a loss for the future. Anyone else wanting to travel these paths would be prevented from doing so. But will there ever be any others? Perrin thought. Apparently cleansing the source hadn't had any effect on the taint inside the ways. What little signs they'd had from the Ogier indicated that they were intent on withdrawing, leaving men to fight on their own as the end approached. Even Loyal, among the most adventuresome of his kind, had been terribly frightened of this place, and at a loss as to how to recover it. Perhaps Perrin should do the world a favor by destroying access not just to Caemlyn's waygate, but to every waygate he could find, leaving this too-hungry darkness to starve upon its own corpse.
Once things grew on the islands.
Loyal's voice, dredged up from Perrin's memories of another visit to the ways, seemed to drift across his mind.
There was green grass to sleep on, soft as any featherbed. Fruit trees to spice the food you'd brought with an apple or a pear or a bell fruit. Crisp and juicy, whatever the time of year outside.
He would have liked to see that, and it seemed a crime of some incalculable nature that such a wonderful place should be abandoned without hope of recovery. Though the powerful and the elite of the world now had access to traveling to cross distances, the steep requirements for that meant it would never be available to the common traveler. He thought of the ways, lush and welcoming, providing a method for people all across the land to travel easily and safely. And when the darkness tried to intrude on that imagining, he forced it back. For now, though, he needed to concentrate on his mission, one that was unfortunately more concerned with destroying parts of the ways than recovering them. How often his hammer had to fall to break instead of build these days. He shook his head, chewing on his jerky and trying to decide if he should give orders to shorten the break for sleep from 6 hours to 4. They'd been seeing more and more signs of Trollocs these last few hours, and he wanted to be out of this place. And yet, if they did end up forced into a skirmish with Shadow Spawn, he wanted the men rested and ready to fight. He'd rather use the channelers only as a last resort. He eventually changed the break to a compromise of 5 hours, then, after giving the orders, found himself sitting near the perimeter of the Ring of Light, where he could watch the camp settle down as he took brief reports from the leaders of the various groups. It was remarkable how, after just one day of marching, there were already things that needed his attention. A thrown shoe on one of the pack animals, a soldier with blisters forming from a new set of boots. They might want to risk a dribble of Aes Sedai healing for that. And a concerning report that one of the water bags had sprung a leak and drained by half with nobody noticing. He handled each small problem in turn, then took reports from the Aiel he'd sent to scout across nearby bridges just in case. Loyal would never have allowed people to separate from the group like that, but Perrin wasn't loyal, and he felt he was capable of judging what risks his troops could and couldn't take. Indeed, he lost none of the Aiel pairs to the darkness. They each reported back in turn. As he listened to what they said, nothing out of the ordinary, he noticed Idara stopping to listen. They hadn't gone running to her first, as they once would have before bringing word to him. The camp was settling down, and the soldiers seemed to get to sleep faster than he ever had in this place. He did note that the 2 Aiel who were on watch duty, Aviellen and Sulin, walked over and joined the other soldiers on duty, who were sitting around a very small fire. They settled down, and Sulin began talking in an animated way. 2 from each group, he noted. White Cloak sitting next to 2 Rivers Man, Mayenna and Gildanin sharing a water skin. and even the Aiel telling stories for the others. He didn't catch all of what Sulin said to them, but it seemed to be a characteristically Aiel story, as the men looked baffled to hear it, though they did smile and ask her for another. "I don't know that I realized what you were doing here, Perrin Ebara," Idara said. "No, not until this trip." He started, having forgotten she was still sitting nearby next to one of the lanterns. "I assumed that once this was all done, we'd return to the Threefold Land," she continued. "Continue to live apart from wetlanders and their soft ways. And yet these months traveling with you have made me wonder. You are building something grand here, which should not surprise me as it does. The touch of the blacksmith. You employ it as quietly but as surely as the best spear-seeking Gaishain." He didn't know how to interpret that. "Conflicts bring people together," he said with a grunt, finishing off his jerky. "I haven't done anything special, Idara, except maybe keep some wool-headed fools from one another's throats long enough for them to realize who the real enemy is." "You build," she said again. "And where you make shade, strangely I find myself wanting to follow. Once I would have said that you should abandon these wetlanders and travel only with us into this darkness. What would you need of anyone but us? The wetlanders only slow us and make noise. Yet today I see what you are doing, and I find that I would have been wrong to make this suggestion. There is a wisdom in you, Perrin Ebara. I do not say this lightly." He looked again at the small campfire. He'd ordered a small amount of wood brought, knowing they'd be grateful for it during the night they would need to spend here. There was something special happening in his group. White Cloaks, Gildanon, and Mayenners chatting together and listening to Aiel stories. Perhaps he shouldn't have worried about such things in the face of the last battle. Yet something whispered to him that if life went on after the battle, and he was going to do everything under the light to make sure it did, it would be important that each of these groups felt they had taken part in the accomplishment. Idara was staring out into the darkness. "There's something about this place," she said thoughtfully. "It reminds me of the world of dreams." "You're a dream walker?" Perrin asked with surprise. "No," Idara said. "I always hoped to become one. As a younger girl But no, that is not worth speaking. I have no personal experience, but this place reminds me of what others have said of entering Telar Onriad. A black emptiness that goes on forever. A place where nothing feels quite as it should." "There are similarities," Perrin said, which caused her to glance at him and cock her head. "But the world of dreams is not so bleak. It's not a place of infinite darkness, but a place of infinite possibility." He chewed on the cheese he'd been given. He didn't hunger for it. He hadn't even hungered for the jerky. Something about this place had always dampened his appetite. "I won't be able to go there so long as we travel in here, and I regret that. I need to return, and go there in my strength. Enter the world of dreams physically." She looked at him sharply. "Do not think of that, Perrin Ebara. It is evil." Perrin didn't reply. He'd been rambling, and perhaps shouldn't have even spoken. But another problem loomed over him, one that would demand his attention once this mission was through. Strength in the wolf dream, in Telar Onriad, involved a delicate balance. The more you pushed yourself into the dream, the more solidly there you became, the more powerful you were. However, you also risked entering too strongly and dying in the real world. Slayer was strong there, so very strong. Perrin needed an edge, a way to defeat him. He rested his hand on his hammer, feeling the warmth inside. "This will not end," he thought, "until you are the prey, Slayer. Hunter of wolves. I will end you." "In many ways," Idara muttered, looking at him. You are still a foolish child, for all the G you have found. So much for her calling him wise. Well, Perrin had grown accustomed to, though not fond of, being addressed in such a way by women who looked not a year or two older than he. You cannot enter the world of dreams in your flesh, Perrin Ibarra. None of the dreamwalkers will teach you this thing. It is evil. Can you tell me why? Perrin said. To enter into the world of dreams in the flesh is to lose part of yourself, Idara said. I only know that. And it would be wisdom to accept the wisdom in it, Perrin Ibarra. Perrin nodded, though it was nothing more than he'd been told before. What did it mean? What was the real risk? The servants of the shadow take these risks, Perrin thought. What risks must we take to stop them? He'd been willing to come here, to risk being lost in an eternal darkness or to the madness of the black wind. Others would call this one step too far, but Perrin suspected it would only be the first of many for him. Chapter 5. Fingernail on Stone. Two Trollocs sniffed at the air, looking lazily about themselves in the darkness. One had the ears and snout of a wolf, something that made Perrin's hair stand on end. Its legs bent like a wolf's, though the hands were distinctly human. The bear Trolloc beside it had an almost human face, with human teeth and a human eyebrow ridge, yet fur on its hands. People who heard Trollocs described often imagined them to be people, just with animal heads. Such descriptions didn't do justice to the disconcerting amalgamation they were. Each one had some human features, particularly the eyes, grossly melded with those of something distinctly inhuman. It wasn't that they looked like beast parts chopped up and mixed with human ones. Instead, they were a terrible perversion of both. A horror that had too much beast to ever be tamed, but too much man to ever be trusted. Worst, Trollocs smelled wrong. Musky, but also faintly of rotting meat. Perhaps that came from shreds of their meals caught in fur or under nails. No right animal would ever be so unclean. The Trollocs, with their sputtering lanterns on poles, stood in the very middle of the bridge from one island to the next. They had a suspicious amount of light on them, not just the two lanterns on poles, but 3 more bright lanterns at their feet. Perrin had never known Trollocs to need light in the outside world, but the blackness of the ways was complete, so he supposed it wasn't odd that they would bring some light. But so much? Perhaps they were just naturally afraid of this darkness. They didn't seem terribly concerned, however, as they spoke to one another in rough voices in a language that Perrin didn't speak and had no care to learn. Gaul nudged him, and the two slid quietly back down the stone bridge and into the darkness. They hadn't brought lights, of course. Trollocs had senses as good as Perrin's. They would notice light, and they might smell something burning. That meant, however, that Perrin and Gaul had to cross back to the waiting force in the dark. And crossing that bridge in the blackness, knowing that if he misstepped, he'd tumble into eternity, sent a shiver through Perrin like the feeling of a spider crawling up his spine. He let out a deep breath when he caught the sliver of light from a shielded lantern ahead. 4 more Aiel crouched around it, including Sulin. Perrin and Gault had left their shoes here after taking them off to prowl forward in silence. Notably, the Aiel hadn't questioned Perrin when he'd wanted to go with them to investigate the light. He had begun to think they respected his abilities as a woodsman. Those Trollocs are guarding the path for certain, Perrin said softly, crouching down near the lantern. We can take them, Sulin said softly. Perrin shook his head. Those two have a lot of light on them, and they're being loud. Something about this feels wrong, like they're bait. The little group fell silent. If I thought I might be followed, Gaul said slowly, by soldiers who are quiet and dangerous, I might consider such a thing. Put out 2 guards I know will be spotted, then watch to see who emerges from the darkness to confront them. "It is done sometimes," Sulin agreed. "2 rows of guard posts, the outer of which must report frequently to confirm nothing is wrong." Gall nodded.
"Very well. Just in case, I will sneak past these 2 and learn if there are any others beyond."
"Sneak past?" Sulin asked. "Stone Dog, the bridge is crumbling and isn't 2 paces wide from side to side. The Trollocs stand in the center. How would you sneak past them?" Gall smiled, then slipped back into the darkness. Perrin glanced at Sulin, and she shielded her lantern fully. Together they all followed after Gall, feeling for the edge of the bridge with their toes as they crept forward. Gall crouched where Perrin and he had been watching a few moments before. Perrin could barely make him out in the faint light of the Trollocs' lanterns. When Perrin and the 4 maidens arrived, Gall glanced at them, then slipped over the side of the bridge. Perrin's breath caught. What was Gall doing? There. Gall had lowered himself and now clung to the bridge by only the tips of his fingers. He began to inch to the side, moving one hand, then the other, not making any noise, not even a scrape of fingernail on stone. Light, he hung vertically from the bridge, dangling over that infinite darkness. Perrin could only imagine how that might feel. The Trollocs seemed oblivious. One of the 2 sat down and began gnawing on something while the other yawned, its wolf's tongue stretching out. Perrin held his breath, fingers tight against the top of his hammer as Gall neared the Trollocs. Perrin thought for sure the man would fall at any moment. Just watching made his arms ache with fatigue.
"Don't you drop," Perrin thought. "Don't you dare let go, Gall."
Gall's fingers passed within mere inches of the Trollocs, but they didn't notice. However, when the bones snapped suddenly in the bear Trolloc's mouth, Perrin did jump slightly in startlement. Ashamed, Perrin glanced to the side where Sulin hunkered down further beside him. He caught a whiff of embarrassment from her and realized that she'd also jumped at the sound. Well, a part of him was glad for the sign of her tension. Gall had acted as if this type of extreme activity was commonplace among the Aiel. The fact that Sulin was nervous indicated otherwise. Perrin and the 4 maidens waited until Gall's fingers inched out of sight into the darkness beyond the Trollocs. Then they waited some more. It occurred to Perrin that if Gall fell, he would probably maintain his warrior's silence lest he give them all away. He wouldn't yell. He would simply vanish. Moments stretched into minutes. Perrin grew increasingly anxious. What if Gall had encountered trouble? What if he had run into Shadow Spawn? What if he was out there in the darkness, bleeding and dying? When Perrin had nearly taken all he could, when he was about to charge the Trollocs himself, something flew out of the darkness. The spear fell like a striking raven. It took the wolf Trolloc in the throat. The creature gurgled in pain, eyes opening wide as it stumbled back. The bear Trolloc turned with a start, and Gall leaped from the darkness, knife in hand. The Trolloc opened its mouth, and then Gall hit, clinging to the 10-foot-tall beast and ramming his knife into its eye before it could scream for help. The 2 dropped, Gall yanking out his knife and slamming it into the other eye. Perrin charged forward, but he'd taken only 2 steps before Gall stood up, wavered only a moment, then recovered the spear from the dead wolf Trolloc.
"I snuck to the next island," Gall said, pointing. "I found 2 other Trollocs at the base of the bridge, bearing only a small light, watching as you had guessed, Perrin Ebara. I killed them silently, then searched the island. There were no others close by, but I dared not stray too far before returning."
Perrin clasped Gall on the shoulder, smiling. To the side, the maidens each raised a spear above their heads. Gall actually blushed. Perrin couldn't recall having seen him do that before. They searched the filthy carcasses but found nothing of use, so they shoved them over the side of the bridge. Perrin wished they had some way of concealing the blood, too. Perhaps they could wash it off? If someone came searching for these 4, it would be better for them to find no signs. Trollocs that had been slaughtered meant enemies. Trollocs that had vanished could have wandered off or been taken by Machin Shin. He'd deal with that once they had regrouped. He led the Aiel back along the bridge, then down a ramp to where they'd left the rest of the troops, clustered with shielded lamps. Arganda looked relieved when Perrin emerged from the darkness. "My Lord Golden Eyes," the Gildanin whispered, raising his lantern. "What happened?" "We killed the sentries," Perrin said. "Excellent," Galen said. "That means a fight. They wouldn't have left sentries unless there was someone for them to report to, presumably. I bet that somewhere nearby we will find a fist or two of Trollocs at the very least." Perrin glanced at Sulin, and she nodded. She agreed. "Then we'll have to find them," Perrin said. "For now, we keep going. Slowly, carefully, and with extra scouts on patrol. Pass word of what we found to the men, Galen, and warn them to be extra alert. We're getting close now." Chapter 6. A pinprick of light. Perrin felt as if the darkness was watching him, measuring him, stalking him. The unnatural stillness of this place reminded him of a forest gone silent, frozen perpetually in that moment of alert tension that came right before a predator struck. They crossed the next bridge in near total silence, passing orders as whispers. Even the pack animals seemed to sense it. Perrin and his officers and advisors reached the next guiding, and here he pointed. His Aiel struck out in pairs to check for ambush. They bore shielded lanterns, only faint slivers of light separating them from this deepest dark. "Light bless them," Galen whispered, "and lead them back safely. I've faced death on dozens of battlefields, never blinking. But something about that darkness seems to steal the heart from even my bravest men. Makes me wonder what kind of people would just walk out into it like that," Arganda said. He and Galen often walked together in here, and at first Perrin had thought it was their rivalry driving each to make sure the other didn't get ahead. Now he wasn't so certain. "I heard several of them whispering to each other earlier," Galen said. "They were making bets on which of them wouldn't return, and instead get lost in the dark. They seem to treat it as a game." Arganda nodded as if this were what he might expect. "It was a strikingly tender moment," Galen said. "Tender? Betting on one another's deaths?" "I've seen many a man laugh instead of cry on the morning before a battle," Galen said. He looked out into the darkness. "They do it differently, Arganda. But they remind me of that, the way men joke to prepare themselves for the fight. They're nervous. They don't like this place either, but they do their duty. I've often heard about murderous Aiel, even fought beside them under Lord Ibarra's banner, but I don't know that I've ever seen them be as human as they were in that moment." Perrin nodded in agreement, though inwardly he was surprised. He had grown accustomed to bravado from the leader of the Winged Guard, not thoughtfulness. The scouts returned, and brought him news of another group of Trolloc guards. The Aiel had disposed of them efficiently, though the news left Perrin increasingly worried. So far they had not found the main Trolloc force, but each group of guards killed increased the inevitability. Someone would check on those dead Trollocs, and the Shadow had access to far more troops than he did. They could very easily end up trapped in here between two enemy forces with no escape other than to risk leaving their prescribed and directed path. They continued, passing the place where the Trollocs had been killed. He didn't need to see the blood on the ground to recognize it. He smelled the fetid stench in the air. At the next guiding, Saren confirmed their location and the bridge they were to take next. Only 2 more islands to go before they reached the Camelin Waygate. It was what he'd expected, he'd been counting, but it was so hard to feel they were making progress in this place. Each bridge looked like its fellows, distinctive only in the pocks of broken stone. The scouts went out again, swallowed by the void. A short time later, Gol and Sulin trotted back out of the darkness. "Perrin Ibarra," Sulin said. "There is a gap in the next bridge, but it has been patched." "Patched?" "With wood," Gol said. "Come see." They waited for the other scouts, then struck out. When Perrin reached the bridge in question, he inspected the wooden portion with a critical eye. It looked sturdy enough, but it had been created without any skill at all. Pieces of wood jutted from the sides unevenly, and many of the nails hadn't been pounded in all the way. It was covered with symbols and words, painted in blood.
"Do we trust it?"
Galad asked.
"We trust it," Gall said. "It is sturdy enough."
Perrin nodded.
"It also presumably carried Trollocs across, so we should be safe. Still, let's go 3 or 4 at a time."
Perrin worried when it was Bornhold's turn, but the man merely pulled his cloak tight and started across. Perrin followed just behind him, lost in thought, until the wet cloak stopped in the center of the bridge and turned, looking out into the darkness.
"Do you hear that, Ebara?" he asked.
"What?"
Perrin asked, a shiver running through him.
"Screams."
Perrin turned to the next man in line, a bearded white-cloak named Gulliver. The man shook his head, indicating he didn't hear anything. Perrin strained, listening, trying to pick out even the faintest hint of rushing wind. It was the sound he most dreaded, the one he'd spent most of their short rest earlier thinking he could almost pick out. It was just nerves, he knew, because he didn't hear anything. Except, what was that? Not wind, not something to chill his spine at all, but it sounded like light. What was this foolishness? A man could not hear light. It was just silence. He was sure of it.
"There's nothing, Bornhold,"
Perrin said.
"No. I hear screaming."
Bornhold's red eyes glazed over.
"That poor soul. It sounds like he's falling through that blackness. Ever falling. Screaming for nobody to hear."
"Bornhold," Perrin said, "you didn't fall. You're safe."
"You should have let me drop, Ebara,"
Bornhold snapped, and he turned and continued across. They reached the foot of the bridge where Sulin and Gall waited for them.
"A guiding is there," Sulin whispered, "but it is not needed, nor is that book the Aes Sedai carries."
"What?" Perrin asked.
Sulin pointed. "Come closer. You can't see it from here, though one should be able to. This place."
Despite her words, Perrin squinted into the darkness, and then was struck as he did see something. A pinprick of light. He'd grown so accustomed to this place swallowing both light and sound that he was almost unnerved by it.
"How large must that light be," he thought, "for me to see it from here?"
He put Galen in charge of seeing to the main troop and told them to wait. Then, gritting his teeth, he struck out with Gall and Sulin into the darkness. It was a fire. Actually more than one, burning in the distance on the next island over. They could see them better as they neared the guiding. Together, he and the two Aiel knelt near the stone slab, not daring to go too much beyond it, lest they reach the edge of the island and drop off into the darkness.
"The way the shadows move in front of the fires," Sulin whispered. "Those are figures."
"Trollocs,"
Perrin said. He could smell their scents powerfully.
"They're guarding the waygate."
They slipped back to the main group, where he gathered his leaders and, huddled around Saren's little book, confirmed it as best they could. One bridge remained to cross to reach the location of the waygate. That was where the fires were, and the waiting enemy.
"Now what?"
Arganda asked, squinting into the darkness, though Perrin doubted he could make out the distant light.
"We could just blast the bridge between here and there. Would that do the job?"
"No," Saren said. "I cannot navigate here on my own, but it's evident from what I've seen that there are multiple paths to any given waygate. If we break one bridge, it will delay the shadow spawn, but not to a meaningful extent."
"We can't continue to let them supply and reinforce behind our lines," Galen said. "We have to seize that island and hold it long enough for the channelers to do their job."
"That sounds an awful lot like it would strand us here," Tam said. "Even if it worked."
"No," Perrin said, scratching at his beard.
"It's not ideal, but this doesn't have to be a suicide mission. If we can wipe out this group of shadow spawn, then it's easy. We destroy the bridges, then walk back the way we came. If we can push them off, we can destroy bridges between us and them first, then do a careful retreat before we destroy each bridge we cross."
He hated the idea of doing further damage to the ways, but this was what they had come to do, and the farther he'd traveled here, the more certain he'd become that it was the right thing. Failure here risked the fate of the entire world. Better to cut off the gangrenous hand than to let it kill the body. "This is a rational battle plan," Galen said. "Assuming we can hold the bridge we first crossed, we should be able to proceed with it." "It depends on the enemy numbers, I suppose," Arganda said. "I still worry about being surrounded." "Our final path of retreat is the way gate itself," Perrin said. "We can escape through it if we must." "Into a conquered city," Arganda said. "We will need only a brief moment after leaving the Waygate to open a gateway to escape," Sioned said. "I'd rather not have to try it, but I agree with Lord Ibarra. It could be a last resort." "Numbers," Arganda insisted. "We need to know what we're facing before we make plans." Perrin nodded. He walked over to confer with the Aiel. Apparently, it was Aviellan and Ferallan's turn, and so they slipped off into the dark to do what might be the most dangerous job of the entire expedition: get close enough to those fires to count the enemy. He ordered his soldiers up and into formation, organized to hold one of the bridges just in case. Each clink of armor made Perrin wince, but he suffered it, waiting with pounding heart until the two maidens finally returned. They stepped out of the darkness, having borne no lights at all, and passed the raised spears of their sisters without comment. "We drew close enough to watch them by the fires," Aviellan whispered. 120 Trollocs. Unless there are more hiding in the darkness, I am confident in this count. 2 night runners." Ferallan nodded, concurring with those numbers. Over 100 Trollocs, with 2 Myrddraal. A daunting force for his 50, though he did have the channelers. "How entrenched do they seem?" "They weren't moving through the Waygate," Aviellan said. "I think they're guards set to watch on this side for something like we're attempting. They have cook fires set up. There are people in pens, Perrin, Ibarra. Wetlanders in what was once nice clothing." "Captives from Camelin," Perrin said, feeling sick. "For food." He had the 2 Aiel sketch out the locations of the fires, the pens, and the Waygate itself for reference. He presented this to his officers and advisors, careful, deliberate in his methodical preparations. Something about this place made him want to jump into action, to get to the fight, for the sooner that happened, the sooner he could escape this darkness. Did it seem like their lights were smaller than they'd been the day before? He forced himself to hold back the wolf, to think this through as the group considered the situation. "Lord Golden Eyes," Galen said, "I suggest that we attack fast and decisively. If the channelers creep up and unleash the power in an overwhelming strike, it will cause confusion and chaos among the Trolloc ranks. The soldiers will easily control the battlefield from there, sweeping the Trollocs away." "Arganda?" Perrin asked. "It's a good strategy," the shorter man agreed. "In another situation, I'd agree with that plan, no hesitation. But it will be noisy and require a lot of power from the channelers. You've warned us against both things in here." Perrin rubbed at his beard, considering the map. "We're not going to be able to do this without making noise, Perrin," Tam said. "You don't just make 100 Trollocs vanish. If you don't want to rely on the channelers, we could try to lure them into attacking us near the bridge, then hit them with arrows, draw them out into an extended fight and retreat." That plan worried him even more. He thought of stringing his forces out through the ways, of trying to successfully employ an attrition strategy against an enemy that could constantly bring new troops in through the Waygate. "No," he said. "We have to pull this off as a bash and grab. Hit them hard, sweep them off, and prevent reinforcements from coming in by seizing the portal itself. That's the only reasonable plan." He looked up, and the soldiers nodded in turn, including Galad. They saw it too. "We have to keep the noise down," Perrin said. "That means minimal channeling. But I think we can do that with Galen's plan. We'll sneak the channelers up with the Aiel and have them hit the enemy with a barrage to weaken and confuse their line. Then the rest of us will charge across. We do it carefully, mind you. I don't want men shouldering each other off the bridge by accident." He waved over Grady and Niald, gesturing toward the map. I want your initial strike to specifically try and split the Trolloc force in half here. We'll pour through the gap you make and shove the Trollocs to the sides, hopefully sweeping them off the edges. He pointed at Idara, Sioned, and Seren. Your first task is to kill those Fades. Focus on them. I don't want to lose a dozen men taking those things out. When the Fades are down, channel only in small bursts. Understood? Sioned nodded immediately, and Idara said, Very well. Both responses seemed to surprise Seren. Perhaps she wasn't accustomed to women who could channel readily obeying, well, anyone. The maidens and Gaul nodded at their part when he explained it, sneaking up with the channelers. Next he'd have Arganda's troops charge, with Galen and Galad coming in behind. The two Riversmen were to stay on the bridge last, then try to get into position at the flanks. This would probably be too tight-quartered a battle for archery, but he'd want them for reserves and, if things went poorly, to cover a retreat. Perrin positioned himself with Galen's men. As much as he wanted to sneak forward with the Aiel, he would just be underfoot. Gaul and the other Aiel slipped one last time into the darkness, leading the 5 channelers and Sioned's warders by hand. Perrin counted the seconds, his men shuffling nervously around him. He loosed Ma'alainir in its sheath, the hammer's warmth comforting under his fingertips. Some of the winged guards stirred, and one accidentally tapped his pommel against his breastplate with a loud clink. Steady, Perrin said into the too empty darkness. Wait for the sign. Perrin forced himself to stand still and not prowl back and forth in front of his troops. They stood arranged in ranks of 3 right at the head of the bridge, close enough that Perrin could make out shadows moving in front of the fires on the island. The last hunt had come. All before this had been skirmishes, but this was the war. He found himself eager. What did that say about him? For years he'd wished only to be back home, peaceful in the 2 rivers. Not any longer. Now he wanted to fight. He carefully, deliberately allowed the wolf to run. He had not started this war. He had not raised his hammer to strike the first blow. But he could see it ended, and with as much brutality as was required. A flash of light soared into the air above the island. Go! Perrin bellowed, charging across the narrow bridge, pulling his hammer free. Chapter 7. The Wolf in Him. Perrin reached the Waygate's island before any of the men behind him. On the island, Trollocs lay scattered, smoke rising from their charred carcasses. As he'd ordered, the channelers had blasted the Trollocs down the center. Perrin joined the Aiel, and together the 11 of them smashed into this weakened core. They worked like a wedge intended to split a heavy stone in 2 along a fault, separating the Trollocs to the left and right, and leaving the center, with the prisoners and the Waygate itself, exposed. It was a strangely hushed force that joined him. Gildanon, Mayoners, and Whitecloaks alike holding in their battle cries. No trumps of war heralded this conflict, and he'd warned the men to keep quiet as they fought. One couldn't expect utter silence in battle, of course, but the resulting conflict bore a frantic sense of silent desperation. Men grunting and muttering, Trollocs growling. Weapons clanged or rang, but even those noises were muted, the pervasive darkness of the ways seeming to sweep in, thirsty, and drink up both sound and light. Perrin gritted his teeth as, with Gaul at his side, he threw himself at a Trolloc with the beak of some bird of prey. He laid about himself with Ma'alainir, and each blow caused Trolloc's skin to smoke and hiss. Perrin was the wolf, and the wolf was in him. There were times when he would control the wolf and let the man rule. This wasn't one of those times. He planted himself near the captives, dropping a ram Trolloc as a dead Fade squirmed and writhed nearby. Bursts of fire fell through the air, immolating Trollocs, throwing up waves of heat. Perrin held his ground as the Trollocs tried to push back in. His plan was a dangerous one, for if the enemy recovered, they could theoretically pen his forces in the center and surround them. Perrin continued to swing, feeling the rhythm of the hammer's beats, almost like he was pounding metal. Gall and he made a good team as Perrin's dramatic moves and sweeping blows drew Trolloc attention, and while they focused on him, Gall could glide in with his spear, attacking Trollocs who slipped inside Perrin's reach or tried to flank him. Time was meaningless to Perrin when he fought. There was only the swinging of Mahalainir, the howls of Trollocs, his labored breathing as he broke his enemies. The battle took on a horrific cast, the hulking Trolloc forms lit by the bonfire, fighting among men who held in their screams, even when they were dropped, bloody to the featureless stone ground. It was difficult not to feel small when fighting Trollocs. You couldn't count on the weight of your hammer to make them stumble. He fought one that had been pierced with 4 separate arrows from a Two Rivers bow, and which didn't drop even after Perrin had connected his hammer with its skull. A follow-up stab from Gall finally dropped it. Each time one of the terrible creatures fell, another loomed from the dark to take its place. It seemed for a moment that they'd be forced back into a crushed knot of men, pressed too close to fight. But he'd asked each captain to bring their finest, and the men didn't waver. Whether they wore polished breastplate, plumed helm, or stark white clothing, they stood shoulder to shoulder and fought. The channelers, following his orders, struck with small, precise attacks, burning down a Trolloc here or there to break any momentum they might gain. Finally, step by step, Perrin's forces began to sweep the enemy back. They expanded their lines, letting the Aes Sedai move in to help the wounded. Perrin stepped back from the fighting to approach the wooden pens that held the captives. He slammed Mahalainir down on the first lock.
"If any in here know how to use a sword, take one from the wounded. Otherwise, stick near the center of our force and stay out of the way."
The people inside were hollow-eyed. They'd seen terrible horrors during their captivity. They flooded out, heads low as they ran for freedom.
"Don't go out into the darkness,"
Perrin warned them, smashing open the next cage.
"Stay with us, or you might end up lost in the blackness forever."
He didn't have time to see if they obeyed. He loped back over to the left battle line where the Trollocs were starting to get routed. They stumbled back, tripping over fallen bodies as his forces shoved them farther and farther. Nearby, the maidens forced back a snarling pack of 6, who lost their footing and tumbled off the side of the island.
"Perrin!"
someone shouted. The loud voice seemed to pierce the darkness. He spun around, trying to orient himself. He had been about to join the White Cloaks and some of Galen's men. In the near distance, the bonfires still burned near the open cages and the stoic shape of the waygate itself. It was open on the other side. Through it he could see figures moving as if in slow motion, gathering around and preparing to enter. Grady had been the one to call for him, gesturing toward the figures.
"Be ready,"
Perrin said, running over.
"We can't let them reinforce from that side. They'll only be able to come through 2 at a time. We should be able to—"
He trailed off as he noticed something odd about the way the figures moved. Those lithe steps, the way they ducked and strode right into the waygate without concern or hesitation. That reminded him of Aiel. The figures that emerged into the ways wore cotton sore and carried spears, though they bore red veils. Perrin lowered his hammer in shock. Those couldn't be Aiel, could they? The first 2 that emerged started straight toward the Aes Sedai, spears held out. Light! They must be Shido who had gone to the shadow.
"Bring them down,"
Perrin said to Grady.
"Now!"
Grady nodded, his face adopting a look of concentration.
"Light! They can channel, Perrin."
"They're bloody strong," Niall said, stumbling up. "They're striking down my weaves as I create them." 2 more of the red-veiled Aiel followed, then another 2. Grady got off a burst of flames, but one of the red-veiled Aiel blocked it with a bright flash of light, doing something that Perrin couldn't quite follow. "Are those really Aiel?" Saren demanded, rushing up to them. She, Seonid, and Adara, guarded by the warders, had been doing as he'd told them, seeing to the wounded, corralling the prisoners, and channeling to help the soldiers only when absolutely necessary. As Perrin started to explain, one of the red-veiled men raised a hand overhead and shot a beam of pure white light into the air. It didn't seem to be aimed at anything specific, but it was so bright, Perrin had to shade his eyes. What was that? The others in the red veils likewise raised their hands, weaving lights into the black above. Trollocs howled, breaking the air with their screams as the last of them were forced off the edges. But something about those lights, those piercing lights,
summoned so deliberately, worried Perrin.
"Stop those men!"
Perrin yelled to Grady and Niald.
"Throw everything you have at them!"
The two Ashaman were obviously trying, and one of the red-veiled men went up in a flashing explosion. The others, remarkably, turned and ran, ducking directly through the waygate. Grady and Niald caught a second one, but the other four escaped back into the outside world. Everything fell silent. Perrin's soldiers were congratulating one another on the short but frantic attack. They'd taken minimal casualties, seized the island, and rescued the prisoners. On the surface, their assault was an obvious success. It even seemed that the strange channeling Aiel, having put in just a brief appearance, had arrived only to discover themselves outmatched, then fled. Perrin saw a different story. As Saren bustled over to try to persuade the White Cloaks to accept healing, Perrin strained to listen. He peered through the waygate at the strange Aiel, whom he could see on the other side, moving very slowly because of the strange time difference between the ways and the outside world. They lowered their veils, revealing smiling faces, pleased with themselves. The doors to the waygate began to close, blocking the red-veiled Aiel from Perrin's view. And as his group hushed, tending their wounds, Perrin heard a soft, distant sound. A faint howl, like the sound of a breeze blowing through a hollow. Somehow, the enemy had learned to summon the Black Wind. Chapter 8. So Sweet to Kill.
"Quickly,"
Perrin said, grabbing Niald by the shoulder, then looking to Grady.
"We need to fight through that waygate to the other side."
The doors slipped closer and closer together, cutting off the light. Perrin leaped over the corpse of a falling Trolloc, running toward their exit, their escape. If the Black Wind was coming, they needed to get out, now.
"Lord Goldeneyes," Grady said, dashing after him. "Perrin! Listen! We can't go through there. Light, can you imagine trying to get through that with channelers guarding the other side? Only two of us could go through at a time. They'd slaughter us as we emerged."
Perrin halted before the waygate. Sensing his concern, the two Rivers men, who had been guarding the channelers while the infantry fought, pulled up around him. Tam knocked an arrow, staring out into the darkness. Nearby, the Aiel moved through the fallen Trollocs, checking for any that were still alive and dispatching them.
"Perrin, lad?"
Tam asked.
"Is something wrong?"
"We're trapped," Perrin whispered as the waygate closed. Grady was right. Fighting through that would be suicide, so long as the enemy was ready for them. But staying here? He strained, listening for any hint of sound. He heard nothing but that faint earlier howl echoed in his mind. And he felt as if he could smell something on the wind, a scent like rot. It was coming.
"Pull everyone back, Tam," Perrin said. "Quickly. Quietly. Gather the wounded, lead those people we rescued, and retreat back the way we came. We need to get away from this island."
"But," Niald said, "we seized the waygate on this side. We need to destroy the bridges and isolate it. That's our mission, right?"
"Those Aiel have done something to summon the Black Wind," Perrin said, pointing. "We need to get away from where they launched light into the air. Now move!"
Nobody gave further argument. They passed the word in hushed tones, the soldiers moving from battle-ready stances to careful retreat. At Perrin's orders, they cut away some of the supplies and tied the worst of the wounded to the pack animals. Tam and the other two Rivers men worked with the frightened former prisoners and had to prod them sharply to get them moving away from the bonfires. Perrin grabbed a wounded White Cloak under one arm as Galad grabbed the other, and they moved across the bridge together. Perrin didn't know if the White Cloaks had refused healing or if their wounds simply weren't dire enough to have taken precedence. They left 12 dead. Low casualties on one hand, though any loss was terrible. But it felt a terrible injustice to leave those heroes alone in the darkness. "What is this you said earlier?" Saren said, bustling up beside him as they crossed the bridge. "You think those dark friends in the Red Veils could summon the Black Wind? You think it serves them?"
"I doubt Machen Shin serves anything but its own hunger," Perrin said. "And I hope I'm wrong. I hope it's not coming for us. But that signal was meant to do something.
Those Aiel didn't attack us. They simply made the lights appear, then left." Saren grunted, glancing over her shoulder, though the bonfires were already starting to die, as if lack of attention let the darkness smother them. "I've wondered how the shadow moves so many Trollocs through this place," Perrin grumbled, still walking with his arm supporting Gulliver, the White Cloak. "Both times I entered the ways before Saren, the Black Wind eventually found us. It can sense noise, channeling, life, and it will feast on Trollocs as eagerly as men. I've seen that for myself, but the enemy transports hundreds of thousands of troops through here. What if they found a way to distract the Black Wind? Draw it away. The shadow could enter a waygate far off and draw the attention of the Black Wind, keeping it focused there while others move through the darkness." "Speculation," Saren said. "You can't extrapolate circumstances backward from these effects." They stopped, finally, at the other side of the bridge. Perrin turned, listening. A distant, soft sound came to him. The sound of a breeze. Elsewhere, it would have been a common, everyday kind of sound. Here, it was the most terrifying thing he could have heard. "We need another waygate," he said to Saren. "Where is the closest one? I don't care where it leads, as long as it gets us out of the ways." "Are you sure you want me to do this?" she said. "I told you before, I doubt my ability to navigate on my own." "Either you find us a way out," he said, "or this place will take us all. We don't have time for hesitation." "I'm no frightened child, uncertainly anticipating a test, Perrin Ebara," she said. "I'm being honest, not hesitant." She opened the book of notes, flipping through. "If I lead us out into the dark, we might never come back." "Do it anyway." She nodded curtly. "Give me a minute." He took the time to pass the word, hushing the men. Oddly, he found one standing apart from the others. Bornhold was at the edge of their light, standing on the bridge, looking back the way they'd come. "What is that?" he said to Perrin. "I hear something. A breeze. It will be good to feel some wind. It's so still here, like death itself." "Blood and ashes," Niald said, hand to his head nearby. Perrin got them moving as Saren struck out, leading the way across a bridge, one they hadn't taken before. Perrin hurried to help with the wounded again. Nearby, Seonad tried to walk while at the same time applying healing to one of the wounded Mayenners, who had been thrown across a pack mule. Perrin couldn't smell any emotions from him any longer. "This place," Seonad said. "Healing through the taint of it is uncomfortable. I worry I'm going to leave wounds infected, not healed." "No more channeling," Perrin said. "Not even to heal." He looked to the Mayenner who led the pack mule bearing his unconscious friend. "I'm sorry." Perrin joined Saren, who was reading her notebook. "I don't know if this will work," she whispered to him. "The notes here say there's a waygate 4 bridges in this direction, but they don't say where it leads." 4 more bridges? That would take time. As they started across the next one, men started muttering, and he realized that their ears were only now picking up what he'd noticed earlier. That howling wind growing louder and louder. 4 more bridges. Perrin made a decision. He stopped everyone in place on their current bridge, hushing them. Then he told them to huddle down, stay quiet, and fully close the shields on their lanterns. The order drew panicked expressions. Arganda looked at him as if he'd already been taken by the wind and had gone mad. "This is our best bet," Perrin told them. "We have to hope that it will come to the waygate where the lights were released, but won't sense us out here." "And if it does?" one of the White Cloaks asked. "Hope it doesn't," Perrin said, a dread growing within him. "Now, do as I said." The men did it, bless them, one by one closing their lanterns, plunging them all into darkness. Blackness became absolute. Nobody spoke even to whisper. He could still smell them, though. Panicked emotions, terror at being in the darkness of this place. He could smell their sweat and their worry. They all could hear the sounds of the wind now, the rushing breeze, the howling coming from the place they'd left. Perrin shifted his hammer back and forth between his hands, knowing full well that it would be useless if Machin Shin reached them. He forced himself to stop. The sounds of the wind increased to a distant, terrible roar. Then Perrin started to pick out the words. Blood, so wet to bleed. Drink it in, drink and drink. Light. He held his breath. So sweet to kill, to rend, to drink and drink and drink, to drink it, to drink his and kill him, to be mine for now, to rend, to break while he shouts, to crunch the bones, to make them mine, to kill and maim and crunch and sing, Ebara! The wind turned toward them, growing louder. In that moment, Perrin knew that no hiding would work. It had caught their scent. It knew they were here. "Lights on!" he roared, leaping to his feet. "And run!" Chapter 9. Song and Fire. The men had been waiting for this. They rammed open their shielded lanterns and began running along the bridge. They knew. Perrin urged them on, yelling at them to pick up their pace. There was no longer time for whispers or stealth. He grabbed Ozzy, a Two Rivers man, and helped him along. He practically carried the limping man, but Ozzy wasn't the only straggler. Gilad stuck beside Gulliver, and the Aes Sedai held back with the rest of the Two Rivers men trying to usher the former prisoners. Many of them were weak from obvious lack of food. The wind howled in the distance, drawing closer. Light, Perrin thought. Even if we were all galloping on horseback, we wouldn't be able to outrun it. There's no way. He passed Ozzy off to Sionid's warders as they reached the next island. He hung back, waving the force forward. "Keep running!" he shouted. Something about the urgency in his voice must have alarmed them, for his yell sent a wave of motion through the former prisoners, who spilled off the bridge onto the island. Gilad and Gulliver went next, though one figure in white lingered, alone on the bridge, looking back at the darkness. "What is that?" Bornhald asked. "That's our end if you don't keep moving," Perrin shouted. "It's coming for me, isn't it?" Bornhald said. "Light, it knows my name. How can it know my name?" "Come on, you fool," Perrin said, yanking him by the shoulder. That pulled Bornhald out of his stupor, and he fell into a dash beside Perrin. But he kept looking over his shoulder as they ran, while most everyone else kept their eyes forward or heads bowed as Saren led them across the next bridge. They didn't want to know. Perrin didn't blame them. The rushing sound advanced, and what had at first been a breeze now blew like a terrible howl, with overlapping voices. It drowned out Perrin's shouts to keep them moving. "Death, so delicious, so sweet to taste your life as it drains. Blood, blood, blood and pain, 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 pain and death. Death, death, death and loss." It was like 1,000 voices, each chanting. The black wind was a thing of the ways, an ancient thing, the essence of madness itself. "How can it know?" Bornhald shouted, his voice nearly consumed in that of the black wind. "There was so much blood. A person couldn't have done that, could they? Even Ordith? It wasn't right. They couldn't have all been dark friends. Some of them were just children." They reached the next island. The wind tugged at Perrin's cloak, and then he felt it in his face. The terrible wind rushed around, coming in from all directions. His party pulled up short as Saren at the front stopped in place. Clothing fluttered and rippled as the mass of people pulled in closer, huddling into their frail light. "It's here," Bornhald said, stopping at the edge of the island. "Grady! Niald!" Perrin said, turning and pointing Ma'alanir into the darkness. "Ebara, Ebara, Ebara, promise to drink, promise to kill, so sweet. Sing the sweetness, sing it to us. Tiny souls have become greatness to feast upon, to feast and sing. Sing, sing, sing!" The two Ashaman released streams of yellow fire, sickly. Particles of black ash floated down from the streams like corrupted snow. Their channeling drove back the regular darkness of the ways, but not the thing that had arrived. A blackness made incarnate, a churning wind that streamed and spun upon itself, wave upon wave of motion. Its voices were thunderous, screams of pleasure even as the fire struck it. Blood to spill, bones to splinter, to grind, to feast upon. Behind Perrin, men fell to their knees. Saren screamed at the front of the group and released her own sickly beam of fire, joined by those of Sioned and Idara, spraying in all directions. The wind rushed around them, and the shifting blackness of its substance undulated, shivered. Bits of light exploded outward from it like frozen sparks. For a moment, Perrin actually thought they were winning. Then the rushing blackness around them tightened, drawing closer and closer. By the light of the fires, by the sounds of the black wind singing, by men yelling, by the feel of wind whipping at his face and chilling his skin, he saw it, smelled it, heard it. Machin Shin was vastly larger than he'd assumed. Perrin had focused on the patch in front of them, the patch that they were fighting. His senses revealed something else, a deep, vast blackness that extended far into the distance. This blackness wasn't just the size of an army. It would have dwarfed most cities. While a piece of it writhed from the fires of the channelers, the greater portion of it swept in and enveloped their island. They were surrounded. The bridges leading away from the island lay inside the mad spinning of Machin Shin. The wind became a vortex, buffeting men and women who watched with horror as the fire of the channelers felt smaller and smaller, grew somehow sicklier and sicklier. Grady and Neald, white-faced and trembling, stopped for a moment. Then something new shot from their fingers. White-hot lines of light, one striking in either direction. Those lines of light left after-images in Perrin's eyes. They were so intense it was difficult to look at them. In fact, being near them made him feel as if he were going to burst into flame. Balefire, the forbidden weave. The balefire drove back portions of the wind, causing it to bubble like leather thrown on a fire. Still the wind continued its song, its mad chanting. Pain, so sweet to sing the song, so wonderful to break and kill. It seemed, somehow, more hungry for being held back a short time. Perrin set his hammer on his shoulder, turning about, his heart thumping. A way out. There had to be a way out. Gall stepped up beside him. "And so we wake," he said softly. "I should have liked to know whether or not this final battle was won. Perhaps I shall know, if I dream again."
"So much blood," Bornhold said. "Ibara, I'm sorry for what we did."
The scent of the man's emotions struck Perrin despite the terrible wind. The pain, the horror, the loss, the fury.
"I'm sorry for your family. It was Ordis. I should have...
Bornhold looked at Perrin once, seeming hollow. Then he ran into the blackness.
"Bornhold!"
Perrin bellowed, reaching forward as the wind surged like a snapping predator engulfing the white cloak. "Souls so sweet to gnash, and the end to know and to rend, and to rip and to feast and to blood, the blood to spill and drink." Machin Shin howled and pulled tighter like a coiling serpent. Its voices overlapped like a choir of demented, each member screaming his own song, trying to yell over his neighbors. Perrin backed away, raising an arm against the increasingly powerful wind. Gall reluctantly joined him, the others pulling into a huddle in the very center of the island. The channelers continued to pour fire and light in all directions, but it was as if they were trying to destroy air itself. Machin Shin had no true substance to destroy. Perrin's back hit that of Galad, the people all pressed together, with the wind spinning around them. Perrin lowered his hammer, thinking of Fail, of Rand and the last hunt, in which Perrin would not run. Light send that his failure here would not doom them all. He looked at Gall, who nodded. A final charge, then, into the darkness. Perrin could no longer hear the shouts of the men and women with him. He could only hear the roar of the wind and the chanting of voices. New ones faded in and out, and the cohesion, if there had ever been one, fractured.
Sweet, sing the sweetness, say it, give the blood to spill, blood to take, blood.
Up, axes,
The marrow to suck, to drink, to hold, to spread, to grind, to... Ebara, 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 promised, Ebara to rend.
shore the hold.
Take it and drink it, give it to all.
Perrin stopped. Up, axes?
Go!
No!
He yelled, grabbing the man, holding him back from leaping into the blackness with spear out. Perrin strained, listening with all he had, trying to separate the madness and the wind from what he thought he'd heard. A low sound, a rumbling bass in tune with itself, and such a contrast from the screeching and disharmony of the wind. Perrin seized onto this thread of sound, which rolled out through the blackness. A humming, thrumming sound that, despite being softer than the cacophony, somehow overwhelmed the mad voices, consumed them, like a flood of water from a broken barrel pouring over a burning wood floor. He could hear it. He could just barely hear it.
Up, axes, shore the hold. Where walls can't stand, we must be bold. Up, axes, strength unfold. To serve the plough, some roots must break. When we must swing, the branches bow. Up, axes, shore the hold. Where walls can't stand, we must be bold. Up, axes, strength unfold.
Machin Shin shuddered. The blackness thinned on one side of the island, and Perrin peered through. Yes, light approached across one of the bridges. Light, and an increasing thunder of boots falling in step. Creatures on thick, sturdy legs with arms the size of tree trunks. Their ears swept back, and wearing fearsome expressions, the Ogier marched, men and women, with axes on their shoulders and mouths open, singing a beautiful song of deep bass and fluttering harmony. Their song flooded the island, and the people around Perrin began to pick it out. They turned, like plants seeking the sunlight, as the Ogier reached the island, and increased their song tenfold.
The night may fall, some logs must burn. Of strength we'll sing, and smoke we'll call. Up, axes, shore the hold. Where walls can't stand, we must be bold. Up, axes, strength unfold.
Machin Shin started to pulse and howl, as if the words wounded it. Perrin felt a weight to the Ogier's song, and nearby the lanterns carried by his men actually seemed to shine more brightly.
Do you feel that, Jer? Niald asked. I think I can reach it, Grady shouted back. It's so pure.
Their channeling cut off, and Perrin, trying to brace himself against the wind with an arm thrown forward, turned to watch as the two Ashaman raised their hands and released twin jets of bright flame that were distinctly more pure than the ones they'd released earlier. Bright lights, not balefire, but a type of weave that cut through the darkness. It shone here in the ways like light should. Light that cast shadows, that drove back darkness instead of being swallowed by it. The black wind howled, hating and screaming, and its chanting began to fracture. Words became fragments of words. Saren stepped up beside the Ashaman and joined her fires to theirs, and the light they created reminded Perrin of something warm and familiar. The sun. Odd how, after only 2 days in here, he should regard sunlight as something he'd almost forgotten. The wind howled again, cries distorting before the light and the song. Then gloriously it started to retreat. They weren't destroying it, but neither could it persist in this place of song and fire reinforcing one another. Seonid and Adara joined in, and together the 5 channelers advanced as the Ogier stepped off the bridge onto the island. The 2 groups merged as the Ogier, axes still to shoulders, continued to sing. Finally, reaching a crescendo of madness against steady, passionate song. Machin Shin shrieked 1,000 screams upon one another, then withdrew into the darkness in a rush. It was gone in seconds, the troops' cloaks and clothing falling still, the ways returning to their eerie silence. Never had Perrin been so happy to hear nothing. The Ogier lowered their axes.
"Oh, Perrin,"
a voice said. Loyal broke out of the line and ran forward, his eyebrows twitching.
"Did you see that, Perrin? We sang the black wind away. I did not know if it was possible, and I do not think it unfitting of me to tell you how frightened I was. Everything I have studied told me this was foolish and hasty, yet I argued we must do it. Can you believe that? When we heard the sound in the distance, I told Elder Hammond. He's back, you know, right over there. I told him that Machin Shin might react to our song if there were enough of us. The Ogier created this place, you know, with the help of the old Aes Sedai. There were songs of growth here, and I thought that perhaps songs would again make it—"
Loyal cut off as Perrin grabbed him in an embrace.
"Loyal, how did you come here?" "Oh, it is not so surprising a thing, Perrin,"
Loyal said, laughing. As Perrin released him, the Ogier reached into his pocket with sausage-like fingers and withdrew a small piece of paper, which he held delicately. The words had been penned by a human hand. "Loyal, son of Arendt, son of Hallan," it read. "I have set another to this task, but sometimes he can be unreliable. I leave it to you, then, to buttress his work. The way-gate in Camelin must be closed tightly, as the shadow plans to strike there. In the past, you have seen fit to fulfill my requests. If you have ever listened to me before, do so now. This is vital." It was signed, Perrin.
"I showed it to Elder Hammond," Loyal said, "and he agreed that we should at least check on the gate as we made our way to the last battle. Oh, you missed that part. I spoke, and I thought they were going to open the book of translation and leave. But they listened to me, and everyone agreed that we must fight. The long hafts are surely on our axes now. No turning around. I spoke to them, Perrin, and they listened to me. Even my mother, Perrin. She's here. You see her over there? She never does look pleased with me, you know, but she came with us to fight. Ah, but I must be brief. If ever there were a time for brevity, now is it. Briefly, yes. Well, we came to see, and we heard the wind. We saw those lights in the darkness, and we knew that we had to try the song. Otherwise, it would take us. It was the only way. Do you know where the others are gathering? We must join the last battle. We were going to walk all the way to the Waygate in Shinar. You know the one we left open before, Perrin? You remember, don't you?"
"I remember, Loyal," Perrin said. He laughed.
"Yes,
"I remember." He nodded to Elder Hammond and Loyal's mother as they approached.
"Greetings to you, elders. Your arrival was quite timely."
Elder Hammond's ears twitched. His white beard reached his chest below the white mustaches that drooped on either side of his face.
"Thank the young one. His encouragement brought us. This is all very sudden."
He seemed a little dazed. Loyal's mother shouldered her axe, looking around with stern eyes. Knowing them, they'd probably debated for weeks before entering the ways, and had still considered it hasty.
"ta'veren,"
Loyal said softly.
"What, you?"
Perrin asked, turning to him.
No, of course not. You, Perrin. You needed us. Perhaps that was why I was able to convince the others to come join the last battle. At the very least, you drew us to you in here. I'm certain of that."
Perrin shook his head.
"For once I disagree with you, my friend. This wasn't about me being ta'veren. This was about courage. Yours, Loyal.
And yours, Elder Hammond. And yours, Covril, daughter of Ella, daughter of Soon. Thank you. From the depths of all that I am. Thank you." For a wonder, Covril smiled.
"There were some who would have abandoned you and the world to the Shadow's fate. I am not one of them, human. Trees will not grow if the Dark One claims this land."
Loyal looked surprised.
"But an argument must have opposition if it is to prove itself loyal," she said. "One who argues truly learns the depth of his commitment through adversity. Did you not learn that trees grow roots most deep when winds blow most strongly?"
She shook her head, though she did seem fond.
"That is not to say you should have left the steading when you did. Not alone. Fortunately, that's been taken care of."
"Taken care of?" Perrin asked. Loyal blushed.
"Well, you see, I am married now. To Aerith, you see. She's just over there. Did you hear her singing? Isn't her song beautiful? She was right at the front with me. Being married is not so bad, Perrin. Why didn't you tell me it was not so bad? I think I am rather fond of it."
Perrin laughed, slapping his friend on the arm. "I'm certain it suits you well, Loyal. But come, I have a mission to fulfill, if you are willing to join me." Chapter 10. Rest in the Light. The Ogier sang a low, thrumming song. It vibrated through Perrin, making the very deepest part of his soul feel warm. By that sound, the channelers lit the air. It wasn't enough to see by completely, as the ways were vast. But within that illumination, Perrin could finally see this place. The waygates sat on vast fields of stone, like hilltops, and connected to them were floating islands of rock shaped like small disks. Bridges and ramps sprouted from these like vines. In the light, there was an organic feel to it all. It seemed an entirely different place. Walking through it in the blackness, he had felt as if it had extended so much farther and been far more twisted than these elegant structures. For a moment he could imagine it as it must once have been. Green and bright, grown, not built. Perhaps they could find a way to bring it back. For now, however, their work was that of a farmer clearing a field and ripping out tree stumps that needed to be carried away so new growth could thrive. With the hesitant blessing of the Ogier, Grady and Niald excised each and every bridge or ramp leading to the hilltop that held the Camelin waygate. There were nearly a dozen of them. The expanses of stone, when broken from their mountings on either side, tumbled down and fell into an expansive darkness that, even with their channeled light, seemed to extend into infinity. The final bridge churned in the dark as it fell. Perrin held his lantern high and listened carefully, but he could not hear the sound of anything hitting down below.
"This is a day of sadness,"
Elder Hammond said, standing near Perrin, his long-handled axe resting on his shoulder.
"A day in which we see the demise of something grand, destroyed by our own hands in the name of preservation. Almost, I think, the price too high."
"The waygate itself remains," Perrin said. "This might be one step further than locking it closed as you did, but it is not permanent. Bridges can be rebuilt, Elder Hammond." Elder Hammond grunted.
"It had to be done, Elder," Loyal said. "Varen Sedai asked it of us, and one doesn't refuse an Aes Sedai. That is the path of wisdom."
Elder Hammond shook his head with a deep, rumbling sigh.
"Well, it was good that you were here, Wolf Brother," he said to Perrin. "We could not have plugged this hole on our own. Our axes could not have felled those bridges as the One Power did. and we would never have been able to hold the Waygate against repeated Trolloc attacks. Still, it is a pity to see this. A pity indeed."
Elder Hammond joined the bulk of the Ogier, who continued to hum their thrumming song. Perrin followed, Loyal and Aerith beside him. Behind, the channelers walked in a tired group. Breaking down those bridges had taken a great deal of strength, particularly considering the frantic battle before it. But, tired or not, they continued to provide light by channeling glowing spheres. So long as the Ogier sang, that light reached into the ways as it should, though regular lanterns still seemed frail and weak before the darkness. Aerith kept peeking over at Perrin, her eyes the size of saucers. She seemed to find his own eyes fascinating, and Perrin bore it without complaint.
"So, it is true?"
Loyal's wife finally asked him. It was odd how easily he took to thinking of Loyal as married. It did suit him.
"The male half of the One Power has been cleansed. Loyal spoke to me regarding it, and I did so want to speak with these men of yours. How mad are they? Is that too forward to ask?" "They are humans, Aerith,"
Elder Hammond said, looking over his shoulder.
"It is all right. They do not think many things are forward."
Loyal's ears went back and forth at that, which Perrin found amusing. Despite often complaining that humans were hasty, Loyal knew a great deal about them.
"The source is cleansed," Perrin said. "And no, Grady and Niald aren't mad. They are as solid and dependable as any men I know."
"I would very much like to speak with them,"
Aerith said.
"Were either of them there when the dragon accomplished this task? I would like to speak with witnesses. Aerith is going to write a book about it,"
Loyal said proudly.
"It can be a companion volume to my story about Rand. Isn't that a good idea, Perrin? Aerith knows a great deal about the One Power."
She was looking at his eyes again. Perrin cleared his throat.
"That's wonderful, Aerith."
Before destroying the bridges, they'd recovered the bodies of those who had fallen on the island. They'd lost 14, counting the poor Mayenner who had died while they ran from the wind, and counting Bornhold, whose body they hadn't found.
We didn't divide the dead by group,
Perrin thought. The men had laid the bodies in a line together, White Cloak beside Two Rivers Man, Mayenner beside Gildanon. He was proud of that, despite the pain of loss. Grady knelt next to the bodies, then raised a hand.
"Any objections?"
he asked of those watching. No one spoke. Grady adopted a look of concentration, then burned the bodies in a great, power-wrought fire that cast back the darkness of the ways and shone as bright as a beacon fire. Perrin stepped up, feeling the heat of the pyre on his skin.
"They are our first losses in this war," Perrin said. "They won't be the last, but each death means something important. It means we won't let the darkness take us. Rest in the light, my friends."
Galad nodded to him, and his rippling white cloak reminded Perrin of how Bornhold had looked running into the darkness. The things he said. Had he been involved in the deaths of Perrin's family?
"Light burned me,"
he thought, feeling old wounds open inside him. It had been satisfying to blame Trollocs for his losses. Trollocs were faceless monsters, and hating them was easy. But Bornhold's words had implied that the blame lay not on the Trollocs at all, but on Padan Fain. Perrin already hated Fain. Could he hate the man more? Would that do any good? The funeral pyre burned low. The ferocity of it meant that only ash remained, mixed with bits of metal. Perrin was about to turn away when Elder Hammond lumbered forward. The ancient Ogier stepped right up to the ashes, then knelt and placed something among them.
"Loyal, if you will,"
he said. Loyal knelt beside the elder, then began singing in a soft voice. He closed his eyes in concentration. Nearby, the other Ogier began humming. It was a wordless song, similar to, yet distinctly different from, the one they'd sung earlier. In moments, the seed sprouted, and a small tree rose in the ashes of the fallen. Loyal opened his eyes.
"I am sorry if it is not large,"
he said.
"I am not so experienced at this as I should be. I am much better at creating sung wood." "That will do, Loyal,"
Elder Hammond said.
"This place was once ours."
His deep voice had grown dangerous.
"It was a gift to us from the Aes Sedai, the last grand work of the male ones. If what is said is true, then the male Aes Sedai have returned."
"We don't call ourselves that," Grady said, "but we have returned."
"Then we will reclaim this place," Elder Hammond said. "It was a gift to us. We should have known that we would have power over it, for it is ours. Once this battle is fought, human, I would return here and see this place restored to how it once was. If you will join us."
Grady smiled, and nearby, Niald nodded. "I think we'd like that, Elder Hammond."
"Then this tree will stand as a marker of our pact," Elder Hammond said. "If it wilts, we will sing it back to life."
The other Ogier nodded. Looking at their dangerous expressions, one might never have guessed how reluctant they'd once been to enter this place. One would never have known how much trouble it had been to coax them. Some of these same individuals had thought Perrin mad for daring to enter. Perhaps they had needed to be shown in person how much their gift had been corrupted. "You wish to join the last battle?" Perrin said to them.
"We have decided that we must,"
Loyal's mother said.
"Then let's rest here,"
Perrin said,
"and allow my people time to recover from what they've been through. Tomorrow, we'll make for Cairhien and cut off its waygate as we did this one. After that, I'll have you to the fighting in no time. I guarantee that every axe will be well appreciated."
Postscript. One of my goals going into the final book, which became 3 books of The Wheel of Time, was to address the ways. There wasn't a lot in Mr. Jordan's notes about how to accomplish this, but I felt that the text of earlier books had implied there would eventually be some resolution to the plot arc. I found my opportunity in the need to stop the enemy from using the ways. It made both tactical and logistical sense to try to cut off access to the waygate in Camelin. From the original outline, it was always my plan for Perrin to take his team into the ways, and in so doing I could reveal some hints about how the ways might eventually be cleansed. The sequence lasted pretty far into the revision process, to the point that I received extensive notes from Harriet, Robert Jordan's widow and editor of every Wheel of Time book, as well as his assistants Maria and Alan, about how to revise it. However, the final revision of the sequence never happened, because in the end, we cut it from the novel. Why? Well, there are 2 major reasons. Problem 1. Tone and continuity. This ways sequence was a little rushed during my initial writing, and so it didn't have the right feel and tone of earlier visits to the ways in the series. Indeed, I hadn't remembered quite how rough the piece was. I thought that I'd be able to clean it up in a couple of days' work, but it took almost 2 full weeks of revision to get it into its current shape. There were also a lot of small but important continuity problems. We weren't sure if it was too much of a stretch to even have Perrin be able to navigate the ways without an Ogier guide. I believe it was Maria who suggested that we use notes from the Black Sisters. After all, if Trollocs are getting through the ways, there must be some fairly simple instructions to be found somewhere. Even with this fix, however, there were other issues with this piece. For example, the original draft had them destroying the waygate, something that earlier books had indicated was near impossible. I fixed a lot of these issues in this revision, making use of the extensive editorial notes, but it probably would have needed several more drafts after this to be worthy of publication in the final book. The second major problem, however, was a bigger one.
Problem 2. Pacing and Regression. As we revised A Memory of Light, one concern kept coming up. Were we looking backward too much? We wanted the book to be pointing toward the battles happening at places like Merilor and Shale Ghul. The idea was that we wanted to keep our eyes forward, keep the momentum up, and dispense with anything that felt too much like a side quest, distracting from the story's building momentum. This sequence kept getting flagged as one that felt regressive. It felt wrong to turn the reader's eyes toward the ways, which wouldn't be important for the rest of the book, and toward Camelin, which had already fallen and wasn't going to be a focus of the book past the prologue. Harriet was the one who finally decided this sequence needed to go. We just couldn't afford 20 to 25,000 words of Perrin running off on his own adventure in the middle of the book. This was particularly true when it became clear that it was going to require a lot of time and revision to get the sequence right, a sequence that was ultimately nothing more than a diversion. The tactics were sound, but in the end, there were a lot of things the characters could be doing, and this one wasn't vital. Harriet was right, and the sequence had to go. I feel bad about axing it, however, because I like a number of the things it does. Bornhald's End feels better to me in this. I enjoy the interplay between characters and the way they pull together here, and the echoing of earlier books. Most, I like the scene where the Ogier show up. The final published version of A Memory of Light has them simply arrive at Merilor without much fanfare, a necessity of the deletions. Of the main characters, Robert Jordan's notes said the least about what to do with Perrin. However, one of the things he did say was that Perrin was to end up as a king. I like how this sequence, better than most in the published version, shows that Perrin has done something incredible in binding together many groups of disparate ideologies and ethnicities to form a cohesive force. I like how this echoes that of all the main characters, Perrin is most suited to rule, because he is capable of building as well as destroying. I wish I could have found a solution and worked the ways into the last book in a manner that wouldn't be distracting. They were a vital and interesting part of the series, yet the finale was forced to ignore them. In the end, I still think Harriet made the right decision to strike this sequence, but I hope that with this publication I can offer a little closure to one of the threads of the pattern that was left dangling.